that or a tactical readiness exam, which is the other, more the kind of the forward end, fighting a war scenario. So every patrol is a different, you're doing ORS, tree, and that's what you do, train up for that inspection constantly. So whereas on a fast attack, you always got the boat and you always got these inspections coming, but you're prepping for a deployment. You've always got the submarine. There's never downtime. It's a much more challenging environment, but it's real. I mean, you're the hunter killers, so you're out there doing the cool missions, whether it's intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, much more exciting as long as you get a good deployment.
Yeah, the first episode of the year. I hope you had a safe and happy new year, and I wish you all the best in 2025. New for the new year is the website's been revamped. So go check out transitiondrillpodcast.com. In addition to that, while you're there, sign up for the newsletter. You'll get additional information on transition preparation and planning, as well as episode information. My guest this time spent 25 years in the Navy. He was a commander aboard submarines. He comes from very humble beginnings. Parents struggled with finances. Their struggles with money actually derailed his plans to go to college. After high school, he didn't really have a clear direction in his life, so he opted to enlist in the Navy. He did really well on the ASVAB, so he selected the nuclear program. While he was in his first enlistment, he got the opportunity and jumped at the chance to become an officer. The rest is history. As he was approaching his transition out, like many others, he started looking for and actually struggled to find that next job. He persevered, he prevailed. In addition to that, he's since started his own business doing financial advising. It was a fun conversation. He's got a lot of good information, especially as it relates to transition planning and preparation. So let's get into it. Here's episode 177 with Alan Nelson.
One of the things I was kind of nervous because I listened to enough of them, and then I'm kind of nervous about oversharing in a sense. You know what I mean? About because I noticed you do go back into the background, and there's so I was just thinking
share
about
everything. Share it all.
There's my wife's more private than I am, so there's a point of getting the point across without saying too much, I guess. But that was kind of nervous.
And obviously, as we work through this, I hope that the more we talk, the more the nerves kind of go away. I understand opening up, kind of sharing. I really believe, and one of the reasons why I incorporate the whole package or the whole story is for somebody listening, there's going to be a piece that resonates, and maybe something from your background all of a sudden clicks with somebody like, oh, this is really impactful to me, or I can really relate to that piece of it more. Yeah. So that's my only motivation. Obviously, at the end of the day, share what you want to share what you don't want to share. There's no time limit on the recording. So if we get down a rabbit hole and it's something that, on the flip side, if you find that we're talking about a topic that you're very passionate about and you want to keep going down, I'll follow your lead.
Okay, sounds good.
So let's make it easy for everybody then. Let's start back at the beginning. Where is hometown? Where'd you grow up?
Well, my hometown is Modesto, California. I was actually born in Washington State in the Tri-Cities. That was Pasco, Washington, where we grew up. And actually, at 7, moved down to Modesto. My father passed away when I was 16 months. And so we had, there was 3 of us. Actually, I was the middle child. My brother was 3 years older. Actually, it was unfortunate. It was 5 days before my sister was born. So I can only imagine the difficulty my mom was dealing with. And ended up meeting somebody who was kind of a tough love stepfather for us, very different from us. But came in. He actually had a piano business that uh, ended up not doing well, and that's what brought us to Modesto. So we moved down from Pasco to Modesto when I was 7.
You wouldn't typically associate piano sales and tough love. Those that doesn't seem like that would be a common mix.
No, and who knows? Like he was, I mean, he came from highly disciplined, a father that used to whip pretty hard, and we were young kids. I mean, that was only a couple of years after my father passed, and so we were probably little spoiled kids, nobody really giving us any discipline at that point. So came in with a heavy hand and was, it was a bit scary for us, I'll admit. But anyway, we ended up moving to Modesto, and that's where I guess I was 7th grade. So we moved another time, and I started really in 4th grade was where we settled through high school in the same home, and that was.
So just for my clarification, you moved from Washington to Modesto at the start of 4th grade or 7th grade?
No, I'm sorry. We moved to Modesto when I was 7 years old.
Got it.
It was actually, kind of end of, I guess, second grade. And I started 3rd grade in Modesto at Beard School. And then we went to next year to Stockard Coffee to the different schools.
Were you old enough to recognize the change in locale? Did it have an impact on you at all?
Absolutely realized the difference. For one, it was much warmer. Like we were running around in shorts and t-shirt, tank tops in the winter in Modesto. And then a year later, of course, we're in these heavy coats because you get, I don't know why we always adapt to being uncomfortable. But we were just young kids though. My brother, sister, and we made friends very quickly. So we, went to the new school. My brother was, we were all, I guess, athletes, and also did well in school. And so we quit. That makes for getting, I guess, making friends pretty easy. And there was a guy we called Squawker that we met. He used to do lunchtime activities, for all the kids. He actually, when we had like the clean plate club, I remember in school, and he was a real good role model for us. I mean, I remember he used to take us to actually even arm wrestling competitions when I was in 3rd grade. But he was
like legitimate organized
ones. And so he used to run the Parks and Rec after school as well. He just loved kids, and there was nothing indecent about it. Just, some people often think that, but he just loved kids. And when he kind of took us under his wing, probably because our family dynamic was a little bit unusual. And so, I mean, it was fun. He used to take us to the water slides, and, he ended up even babysitting us when our parents would, head out somewhere. So, but that was, so we did, I feel like, yes, there was definitely differences, but we quickly adapted. And then we moved to another school, a year later, and, quickly, that was one of my 4th grade was a great year. Like, it was a new place, and it was a lot of fun.
What drew your stepdad? So your stepdad's business drew him down here, but how did he pick Modesto of all cities?
Well, it was a job opportunity. Unfortunately, like it was he went bankrupt, lost the business, and that's what. Then we were it was a job.
Got it.
A sales job down here.
Not like he relocated his business down here.
Correct. It was the business ended, and he found a position here in sales so that drove us moving down here, and then we stayed ever since. So,
was your mom working at the time?
Yes, my mom was a nurse. So that was back when nurses were paid very poorly, relative to, well, they just weren't paid well back in the day. And fortunately, when nurses are now getting paid, really, they're much more what they're worth. But she was, and nearly the entire time growing up, she was a night nurse. And she worked in oncology a lot. So she dealt with some, difficult times. So I remember, I remember seeing her. I had a paper out since forever, but I'd see, sometimes she'd come home and I was the only one up. And, see the pain and emotion that, she dealt with, being kind of the bedside person for people are almost like hospice care, really. So,
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing for people who don't understand nursing, especially when it comes to oncology. For many of them, you're dealing with that one patient for a protracted period of time. You get to know them, you get to know their families, and so when they do pass, it's a huge emotional burden that you're carrying with you.
absolutely.
And then you move on to the next patient. I mean, it's weird.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's tough. And not, it takes a certain kind of person, I think, that can handle that. But
What was your sport of choice growing up?
so my parents threw me into sports right away. I was like 4, I think, when I first was 4 or 5 when I first started in baseball and soccer. So I wasn't a naturally gifted athlete. I was in T-ball. I was the pitcher, if that says anything. That's where you put the person that does not have any talent.
Just stand here.
So, but I guess one of the, and it's funny, my brother was a natural. He didn't start playing soccer until he was in 5th grade. And that was due to the guy, Stuart Heller, Squawker. He kind of forced him into it because my brother was the fastest kid in school, and he kind of made him play soccer, even though my brother used to make fun of it, like it was for, as he called, for wussies. But I was playing since I was, 4 or 5, and
What time period are we
baseball.
talking about?
Time period?
Yeah, like is this the
So there's different seasons. So
No, I mean,
Oh.
what years are we talking about?
well, I started playing when I was 4 or 5 years old. You mean what year was that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was born in 72, so that was 76.
So
77.
still before soccer's anywhere near as popular as it's been, even for
Absolutely.
kids of the last 20 years, I would say.
That's true, but I would say, despite that, nearly every boy I knew and most of the girls in Modesto played soccer. But for a lot of boys, they played it before they started playing football, which my parents, they didn't let us play football. They were afraid we were going to take out our knees. And so I played soccer. We played soccer, basketball, and baseball. And the baseball became my best sport. Soccer, my second best. I was just never. I'm 5'10". I'm not going to be an incredible basketball. And I don't have jumps like some people.
Not blessed with the talents or the attributes necessary to be a good basketball player.
Exactly. So we played. Boy, my brother. It's funny. My brother actually was great at soccer. Just right out of the gate, he scored 28 goals his first year. I grew to be good, I guess. And I always got good from hard work. I think that was, that's one of my, I guess, best attributes was I just worked until I got good at something. And baseball was actually my best sport though. And I was a pitcher and a good hitter. And so, and it's funny because I was his least good sport. And it was kind of weird because he was 3 years older, but we did everything together growing up. And, partly I think that's due to the family dynamic, but we probably were closer than most brothers. I mean, we never even fought when, after he was punching me as a little kid. But I mean, he was my source of safety growing up. And so, and I learned sports from him, which gave me a heck of an advantage. Like I said, when I went to 4th grade, the new school, I could play basketball way better than the other kids just because I'd been playing with my 3-year older brother and all his friends. And, then in other sports, it's just having an older brother. It's always kind of an advantage.
I think that's one of the things that kids are missing today is that just playing quote unquote outside and with that varying age range where all of a sudden now you're the kid who's 3 years younger, but you've got to kind of step up and play basketball or play baseball or whatever sport it was when you're just the unstructured sports where you're just out in the yard or out in the street or whatever it is. And you just learn to adapt, but it makes you better.
It does. And that was one of the best things about our community where we grew up, that once in 4th grade on, we had a community pool in our neighborhood. And we had some of the best athletes that ended up being at our high school right in the neighborhood. And suddenly most of them were a year older than me, and then one of our best friends of brothers. They were same difference, 3 years apart, but 1 year older than both my brother and I. And they were like the best athletes in this school when we got there. And all of a sudden we're in the same neighborhood, and we're going to the pool every day. We're playing kick the can, playing ditch, and all the neighborhood. It was amazing. The neighborhood let us run through their yards, jump their fences, I mean, and it was just so much fun. And that's what we did every night, and it was, um, going and playing and, actually being outdoors, which is, I think, sadly, too many people aren't anymore. And of course, there's safety concerns, but I guess we were the true latchkey kids as well. That I think most of X generation, and we typified that more than most. My stepdad was gone much of the time, and my mom worked nights. So I mean, we grew up making our own food, and just you get home, walked to school, rode our bikes to school, whatever, and just kind of had to figure out how to take care of ourselves, or from a young age. But
How was your relationship with your stepdad?
it was tough. It was the
Want to move on from that? That's
no that it well, like I said, I think that's why our siblings became closer. And I learned later what it meant, but a middle child syndrome. But I think our siblings only mainly found safety in each other. And I looked up. I think probably most little boys have. My older brother was my idol. Since I was a little kid, I'd eat. He ordered an orange drink. I'd order orange even if I didn't like it. But he. I mean, that was my safety. Like, even when I was a young kid, when I had a nightmare, and this was probably, I was probably 7 or so, but I didn't go to my parents for safety. I grabbed a blanket, yeah, went and slept in my brother's room under at the end of his bed, not, on the floor, just grabbed,
right.
that's where I felt safe. And, so it was tough. It was very different. He was a talented musician, not into sports, was not a college, was not college educated. And we all did well in school. We were fortunate that we got good grades. We were good at sports, and we made friends very easily. My brother he was the most popular kid, growing up and through high school. And I guess that's where I feel like middle child syndrome, where I learned this from when I moved out when I was 18, but from my roommate. One of my roommates, she actually saw, she was also middle child. She goes, "You're a classic middle child. No matter what, you're inadequate. You can never be as good as that oldest, brother. No matter how hard you try, or no matter how much your actual accolades, if you go on above and beyond, it doesn't matter what you think in your head." And so it was an interesting, learning about that years later. But
It doesn't sound, though, like it impacted the dynamics between you and your brother's relationship.
it didn't until much later. He actually got kicked out of the house when he was 16. So, and then I got grounded from my brother, which was, that was terrible. And I remember still the first time, actually seeing him again when we were walking along. I just, can still remember where we were walking, down this, side street. And, I was a quiet one. I guess, I saw him getting in trouble, so I learned how to become sneaky. My brother and sister were, they were the kind of the noisy ones. I was the quiet, shy one. And I remember him saying to me at some point, though, he knew I could get away with things, but he's like, "You're never gonna make change unless you stand up." And by then I was in debate. I was good at arguing. and I would set him up. Um, and I mean, I don't know if it made change, but I started really standing up for myself at that point. And, um, then my brother and I had a relationship again before he joined the army, I think at 19. Kind of he needed an escape. Um, was, he had went from, excelling and to, things not going so well. And then I think I remember him saying he actually was going to Modesto Junior College and got an F in a class. And that was his wake up call. Like, I've got to, I've got to go join the army, or I'm going to go to jail or something. It was his, and he did, and was very successful, from that point on. So.
Was he rebelling in general, or just kind of rebelling against the rules in the house and kind of the relationship with your stepdad?
I think it was rebelling against the rules in the house. It was kind of my way or the highway, definitely. And there was, sometimes I do think that our stepfather was actually jealous of us, and if that makes sense.
No, I could see it.
And that's not, I mean, and he wanted us to excel, but at the same time, he would, it was like he needed to put us down because nobody else did enough, maybe, if that makes sense. And so there was some, definitely interesting dynamics. I learned a lot from just watching my brother. Like I said, I was pretty sneaky, seeing him rebel, and I could rebel in my own way. But I saw what worked and what didn't. And so I didn't get near as much trouble as he did, those early years. And,
from my limited experience of it, it definitely takes a large level of maturity when you're a parent or in the role as a parent to understand that largely your job is to make your children better than you and to encourage that growth. And like you said, if you feel inadequate or if you feel intimidated by what you didn't succeed or accomplish in your life, I would imagine it's hard for a parent to then encourage their child to do better. I think the ones who have done a lot with themselves or have gained that level of maturity, however it happens, are the ones that are very encouraging of their kids. Like, go do more than I did.
Yeah.
So
no, that's probably true. And my mom was submissive to him. And so we used to play off of her, and that was just tough. And he had a child from a previous marriage that used to come and visit us once for a month each summer when we were growing up. And he was just totally different than us as well. Not into sports. We used to make him this crazy sandwich that was, still don't think he ever liked it. It was just for attention, but we used to have to make it for him. And it was, it was much more like my stepdad. And I remember he later moved in with us when he was a sophomore. He was 2 years older than me. And so then he was permanently in our house when I was in, I guess it was 8th grade. And that was interesting. And I guess it was one of the times I really learned about, say, acceptance. Because suddenly when I went to high school the next year, suddenly my brother's the one everybody makes fun of. Your
stepbrother.
Yeah. And it was, that was, I mean, we probably had made fun of him, when we were younger, but then all of a sudden it's your brother, like in your home, and you're like, you people are mean. You don't know all the good things about this person, and that was just definitely an interesting time for us. But it was also interesting to have him in the house with his dad and our mom. And I remember I remember being frustrated because he didn't get good grades like we did, and he wasn't on the academic plan to go to college. He was actually really smart in computers back in the day of the Commodore 64, et cetera. But then never went on to college. And, but I remember like I said, I was a hard worker and I was very competitive. Part of, I think, being a middle child too. And, along with being the mediator. But I remember got straight A's and, in all the honors classes as well, my, freshman year. And we didn't get anything, but my stepbrother got a 3.0, got straight B's and got taken out to dinner and some money. And I'll admit I was a bit jealous and, I said something. I don't remember what happened, but my stepdad came up and said, look, you'd get good grades for you. It has nothing to do with us pushing you. That's just, but your stepbrother, does this for us. Getting good grades is more of a challenge for him. So him getting those grades is more significant. And while it maybe didn't make me happy, at least I'm like, okay, that's true. I'm doing this for me, not for you guys, but, still there should be some fairness. I felt like, it's, and that was an interesting dynamic we had, I think, in the family of what, having the different siblings, in the house like that was definitely, added some learning about acceptance, but also some challenges with, our parents and what we thought was right and wrong and how they, how they treated all of us individually, and
I could definitely see, especially, and try to look at your family from a 30,000 foot view. I could see your brother, very good athlete, very good student. And all of a sudden, and the oldest, now the younger one comes in, not you, somebody in between you guys who gets rewarded for not doing, at least compared to you guys, as well as you. I don't know, maybe straight B's for him was a huge success, regardless.
Right.
But I could see how that could also be that leverage or that tool almost, so to speak, that causes divisiveness or causes the gap to grow even further. And with your brother being the oldest, the first to really kind of push back against it.
And by that point, no, it was actually before that, because by the time he moved in, my brother had been kicked out.
Okay.
So it was for, as far as that whole comparison with the grades, that was me and him. And,
got it.
But similar things, we'd probably seen that throughout the years, just even him coming down where, spending a month with us each summer. There was that dynamic already kind of building.
Closing in on the end of high school, what were your plans? Did you want to go to college?
So when I was freshman, it was a good year. I had a 4.5 GPA, straight A's in all the honors classes. I was playing sports. Baseball, I was the MVP. And usually they had best defensive and best offensive player, but I had over a 700 batting average, and I won all but one game as the pitcher. So it was, I was playing basketball that year, and then I switched to soccer because I was like the 6-7 man, and I need to start I played enough. And at the time I was it was club soccer, the traveling soccer team, that we just called it that because there was only one team back then,
right,
in the city. And, so at the time I was playing that and basketball. It was busy. So I was still I had a paper out since I was 10 years old. And my freshman year, my thought was I'm going to Stanford. And then sophomore year was good. Still play, and I switched, made, varsity soccer that year. And, same with baseball was well. Then I got, recruited by the football coach to come kick for them, on my junior year. So junior and senior year, I played football and then soccer and baseball. But
were you the place kicker or the punter?
Place kicker. Never a great punter, but I could kick the ball. I kicked the ball very, very well. that was what he used to come out to our soccer games, and he came up to me and said, "Hey,
we're better to scout than a bunch of guys kicking a ball around."
Yeah. So, but my parents, they wouldn't let us play football, but I said, I'm just a kicker. And so I don't think they really thought about the fact that you have to go and then go hit people after the fact. But it was fun. It was, I still remember I think it was the record at the time. I kicked a 47-yard field goal, and we were playing, our team was not very good.
So you were kicking a lot of field goals.
So, well, unfortunately, they tried to. We didn't make it far enough to set up for many field goals, but we were playing a team out of town that was far better than us. And after I kicked the longest field goal, the kickoff, he ran it back for a touchdown. Classic. Like, let's just take that away from you. But I was talking with a friend recently from high school that we kept in touch. And I don't know, maybe it was part with the family things going on. And then I started working we all actually worked at this Marie Callender's. It was a great restaurant, but I was bussing tables and loved it when I was, starting at 16. And
pull that mic just a little bit closer to you.
So 16, I started working at Marie Callender's. My brother was a waiter there before he joined the Army. And I didn't even get interview for they liked him, and they said, "Oh, you want the job?" Like, yes. And so I started, and that was fun. That was my first, that was where I guess people learned about my work ethic. And I, quickly jumped into it. And, but I kind of got lost, I think, on the rest, whether it was, dealing with family. But I kind of lost my way, I think, with school. I still was doing well, but, and then I had an injury in soccer, a significant injury that put me down. Actually at the doctor, because I'd blown it off. Somebody kicked me in the calf deliberately right at the end of the game. And, it was so bad that it was a thrombosis, a phlebitis. The doctor actually thought a thrombosis. And of course we were tied for first. And I was the sweeper in soccer. That's kind of the person who controls the whole defense. And my coach was very competitive, and we were tied for first place, and we were playing the other team that was undefeated at the time the next Friday. And so I remember,
is this still the club team or your high school team?
No, this is a high school. Yeah, this is our varsity high school team. And I remember going down, and my calf was kind of almost instantly the size of my thigh. And,
not good.
Set up doctor's appointment, but went to soccer practice the next day, and he asked if I was going to the doctor, and I said yes. And he said, we were like I said, we were playing the first place team the next day, and he said, "Well, you go to the doctor, and the doctor's going to say you have a contusion on a contusion and not let you play, and I need you to play." And I was like, he's like, "Do you know what a contusion is?" So he makes me feel stupid because I don't. A contusion's a bruise. But so it made it sound like it was, it's just a bruise. Of course, he's not a doctor or anything.
Just rub some dirt on it. Walk it off.
But I did blow off the doctor's appointment. And I remember went and played, and I could only play the first half because that's when I actually learned that you have two separate calf muscles because they were cramping separately. And I finally went to the doctor a week later, and this was, I guess, still never forget what she said, but she goes, she asked me why I blew off the doctor's appointment. I explained to her that, we're playing the first place team, blah, we're tied. You could see like the steam coming, like just angry because she was our family doctor. We had been going to her for years. She said, "This is how people like you die." And I was like, "Okay, you've got my attention now." And
let's not go over the top, Doc.
But she explained to me what was going on, and that, hey, if you have there's could be a blood clot in here, and you go jumping and running around like that, like that, your blood clot could go with those, swollen blood vessels right up to your brain and you're dead. And I was like, okay. And then she took me out of school, for a little over, said I could just basically bed rest so that it can, heal without, and then I don't know, soccer was done. Baseball, I was told then I couldn't start, which I'd always started. And I could come out and just do like prep for the after, senior year. And I was like, I was just not.
So this was a significant enough injury that it kept you down for a while.
Yeah, it kept me down for a while. And then I, it kept, so there's always overlap between sports a couple of weeks. Right. So you always start out at a disadvantage unless you're, known. And I was, the coach knew me, but then I was out a little bit longer and I realized I'm like, I can't just sit bench. And I had kind of lost my way. All of a sudden I hadn't been going to school on a doctor's note. And then I just didn't go back to school and I'd go to some classes and teacher would go, do you have a note? And I'm like, okay, I'll come back. We can get it. And I just leave. And I remember, so I just kind of lost my way. Were
you able to pull the wool over your parents' eyes that you were just kind of blowing off everything?
They finally, when I had to take my mom in to go and get truancy step number 1, they realized something was wrong.
No hiding this anymore.
And then I went, as soon as I did that, then I was back to school. But I remember I turned in, I was in an accounting class and I still did my homework. Like and I remember turning in this like stack of homework like this to the teacher and she graded it. And I got one thing wrong in the entire thing. And she looked at me, she's like, came and she handed it back. She goes, I don't understand you. Cause I hadn't been in class in weeks. And, but I remember I was graduating. I think I graduated 20 out of 520 at the school ultimately, but I was looking at not graduating because I had my English masterpieces teacher. He was tough. He was one of those most people didn't like him. I actually did like him, but he gave me, I had an F as a progress report with 4 weeks left until graduation. And all of a sudden I'm looking at, I had to pass that class. I'm looking at, from graduating in white to not graduating high school, which is pretty pathetic.
Was this all because of the soccer injury?
No,
you were already kind of tuning out.
I was already tuning out. I was working. I was partying with my friends. I was working as a busser, and we were the ones that always closed out. And that was a great job. Like, talk about, I quickly became the best busser. I mean, I had a serious work ethic, probably too much, but the busser and the backroom guy were the last people that closed up the place, and I would help him clean. And heck, 16, 17, we had a bar at this Submarine calendar, is the only one and sitting there and we're watching like ESPN or whatever. And all of a sudden the manager, each one would do this, but they had the draft. And so I'm sitting there, they'd ask if you want a beer, have a beer. So, got in that lifestyle, like it was fun. I felt, that place was much like a family. And got into partying too much and just kind of lost my way, and so it was not just the injury, but the injury was kind of the final thing in my senior year that kind of just knocked me down, for a bit. And I didn't know what I went from wanting to go to Stanford to, I didn't know what I was going to do. And then friends that I worked with at Marine Calendars, actually it was he was the best busser when I showed up there, trained me. And then we, quickly, we're actually kind of competitive. And, but another, great woman, started working there. They started going out, eventually got married, and, they moved up to Sacramento. And, after I graduated high school, they actually said, hey, they needed a roommate, said, we'd like you to come and we think you need to get away. And I did. I needed to get away from the house I was living in. It was not a good environment. And
I was going to say, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, what it sounds like to me is you buried yourself in everything that you could, whether it be academics, sports, getting a job, almost to kind of stay away or be away from the house.
I I think you're right. We are also, like I said, we grew up poor. I don't think explain that very well, but I got a paper out when I was 10. My brother had a paper out. I was helping him when I was 8. Um, like I said, um,
By choice, or both of you
by choice.
wanted to put money in your pocket?
I realized if I didn't want Tough Skins or hand-me-downs, if I wanted to get Levi's or something, I needed to make my own money. So I started, you know, making my own. And then if I wanted to go to the movies, and I was a natural saver. And I think it's interesting that background growing up, you know, and look, I quickly learned the value of a dollar very early. I think led me later to my desire to help people with money in the military when I, you know, joined. And, but I was always a saver right away. And my brother and sister were both spenders. And, I mean, heck, when I was 14, I remember, you know, I don't even think my mom knew about it, but loaning my stepdad $600, you know, interest-free loan, unfortunately. I mean, sad. I should have money in the market. You know, I didn't know you don't know any of these things when you're that age, but, you know, I was given interest-free loans, you know, when I was, you know, not even 16. And then working at Marie Callender's, that just became fun. It was a different, you know, that's where, I mean, I wouldn't put my head down. Like, I was really good busser. When I became a waiter, the manager when the new busser would come in, he'd make me I had to, get a replacement for me first. And then when the new busser would come in, the manager wouldn't seat me tables. He goes, give me 30 minutes. Just show them what you do in 30 minutes. And that'll be better than 3 days with anybody else, you know? So I had a lot of pride there, if that makes sense. So it was enjoyable. And I remember this manager actually, because when I kind of lost my way, that was my source of pride at the time, even though sports and everything in school was still going fine. That's where I guess, you know, it's my new family. And that was my source of pride. And I remember telling the manager, like, you know, I thought about going into the restaurant industry, and unfortunately this person said, no, you got way too much up here to do that. You need to go to college. You know, I won't let you do this. And I mean, that was, you know, that's the kind of people you know, fortunately some of the kind of role models that I had that helped, you know, when maybe I didn't see, you know, have role models in other avenues.
Did you end up moving up to Sacramento?
Moved up to Sacramento.
Was that a good change for you?
It was a great change. It was absolutely. It was really what I needed, because I needed to get out of the environment I was in. And I was going to community college, and then I got my edge back. I remember I was, you know, it's tough. Never had a dime. You know, like I said, I was loaning my parents money. So I was working and going to school, and I had a terrible car that I couldn't even afford to repair. And so I got a road bike, and so I was riding 10 miles to and from work. I was working at a hotel as a, you know, bellman / driver, which was great. And going to school. And then I got back, I got really fit. I was going to school, and, you know, things were going well. And, you know, I stopped the partying. You know, I had a great confidence again in myself. And it's funny because we haven't talked about the military yet. And when I was a junior, the best counselor at our school, he actually had last names A through C. I was a Nelson, but he kind of pulled me under his wing. I was his paper boy for, you know, 5-6 years. And he used to pull me in with all the A through C's, like the academic ones, when he had something he wanted to talk to them about that's important. And he used to pull me in. He even told him, he goes like, this is, my adopted person, our counselor was terrible. And I remember he pulled me and one other guy in our junior year and talked about the military academies. And he said, look, I think you two are the only people at our school that could get accepted into the academy. I was like, no way at the time, that was
Not even something you'd even thought of.
No, I hadn't. And I was, heck, working at a restaurant, they were drinking beers at 16, not ideal, but, the idea of going to, this kind of environment seemed crazy to me at the time. And, then my brother, joined the Army, and, it was good for him. He needed that discipline. I moved to Sacramento. That's what I needed. And I got my discipline back. I always had discipline, relatively speaking. And, but that was what I needed to be on my own. And, I was tough, but I got my confidence back and my edge back. And I remember this is when I really thought about the military again. Because despite that, I knew I was wanting to do engineering I was a math geek. I knew my times tables since I was 5 years old, helping my older brother when he's got, learning them. That was a good advantage as a young kid. And, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And I finally, for financial aid, once you're on your own for 2 years, you're supposed to be independent, different story, right? So I was hoping to get some grant money, and, I knew I was going to go on to a, larger four-year university. It's going to be more expensive, but also probably more difficult, where I wouldn't have as much time to work. And so I go apply for financial aid, and I remember they said, no, sorry, you make too much money. What are you talking about? I'm just barely surviving, I can't even, I'm riding my bike. I don't even have a car,
One step above poverty. You make too much money.
Well, I'll never forget it was very honest. And I'm glad she said this. She said, look, I'm sorry. You're white, male, and middle class. And because of that, we think your parents give you money. That's how the system works. I'm sorry, that's not fair. And that's not true, I'm sure, but that's just how the system works. And I was glad to hear that, because it was a wake up call for me. Like, okay, yep, I'm not going to get financial aid. And I was always, like I said, I was a saver, and I saw what my parents, how poor they were with money. A couple of bankruptcies and student loans. My mom was paying off till her, in her 40s or so. Stepdad never went to college. But I didn't want to. So at that point, I was like, what am I going to do? I know ultimately I want to get my degree, but I don't know what, something in engineering. But what am I going to do?
Well, and that's the other side of it is, it's one thing to want to go and improve yourself. It's one thing to want to go to college. But if you don't even know what your end goal is or what you want to use that degree for, why waste the money, so to speak?
Right. Absolutely. And I saw that and I think that's a problem with our system in general. Who knows what they want to do when they're 18 in reality? People, I think the only ones that do are people that think they want to be doctors or lawyers, and they might not even know. That's just, they think that because there's a lot of money, prestige, et cetera. But, so at that point I was like, what do I, and I remember, my brother was, in the Army, and I was like, well, I would like to serve our country. And I think I always had a service mindset, just from, can get into that more, but, so I wanted to serve. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So
other than your brother, any other connections to the military?
So not really. My stepdad actually wanted us kind of to go in the military, but he never did. Whether it was an injury or something that kept him from, but he didn't. My real dad, he was in the Air Force for a couple of years, but that was, like I said, he passed away when I was 16 months. And so there wasn't really, my brother had went in, and then I remember, thinking like, oh, well, let's see, I would like to serve our country. And I wasn't planning on doing a career. Maybe, and I was thinking, you know what, maybe going and serving, that might help me figure out what I really want to do, like what, and you know what, I don't want to get in a lot of student loan debt and be straddled by this in, my 30s. And maybe they'll pay me to go to school, or I'll at least get the GI Bill and be able to go, pay for school myself. And so that's when I started going, talking to recruiters. And I first, my brother was Army. So I went and talked to the Army recruiter. These recruiters are terrible. And he, and I knew I knew I had a good test scores. Yeah. Well, I took the ASVAB then. And so I wanted something to use my math skills and brain. And, what they had in the Army wasn't that, it wasn't what I desired. And the recruiter, though, called me up and acted like, you have no options. And I was like, buddy, you need to know who you're talking to. I have plenty of options. And, unfortunately, that's what a lot of recruiters do. They think they can just kind of force you into it, and they need to know the type of person they're talking to. Some people need that, and they need to, and that might be it. So many of them, are enlisted, come from troubled backgrounds, and that's their escape route. And so I get that, but recruiters need to understand there's different people they're talking to.
True. And to play devil's advocate and give them as much benefit as possible. I understand a little bit of it. At the end of the day, they have numbers that they need to meet. But at the end of the day, also, there are some people who come in who legitimately, hey, these are your only options. I'm not playing games with you.
Yeah.
These are, so it just, where I was going to ask you is, had you spoken to any of the other branches at this point in time when the Army was trying to pressure you into signing? So that you did know that you had other options?
I had not, but that's what led me to it. And I wasn't all set on it. My brother and I, we were the best 2-man team ever. We never lost ever on 2-on-2 sports. It's kind of amazing because like I said, remember those 2 brothers I told you about? They were better athletes than us, but when we played 2-on-2, we won. We're a team we just read each other so well, we complemented each other so well. So that was definitely a desire.
Was your brother pushing the military for you?
He did. Yeah. Cause for him, it was life-changing, and he even when he came and saw me in Sacramento on leave, he was talking about it, but I was like, Brian, I'm doing great, like at the time. And he saw that I had matured, and coming to my own, just living on my own. And, but he loved it and he promoted it. And, so I did look at the Army first, didn't like what the guy had to say. Then I went and talked to the Navy, and they saw my test scores and they were like instantly nuclear power. And that was interesting for me. And, cause they make the rank fastest. They get paid, they get best bonus, and there's a reason for all this because of the hours you put in and how hard it is. But they said, if you're interested in an officer program, this is where we probably get the highest percentage of people that become officers as well. I didn't know that much between officer and enlisted, but I was like, okay. And, so I talked to them, and I was looking at the nuclear power route, and that looked interesting. But I also, I did talk to the Air Force as well. Another classic recruiter story. And this, I brought one of my friends in, one of my partier friends. He was a year older than me. Great guy, but needed to, he was one that I was hoping he'd join me and going into the military, because he needed that discipline to get back on track. And we go into the Air Force recruiting office, and we're standing there. It felt like forever. It was, I thought it was like 10 minutes. It was probably like 5, but that's kind of a long time while you're just standing there doing, looking around at the 2 different people in the office. And finally, one of them says to me, can we help you, or something like that? And I said, yes, I was curious what you had to offer us. And Pipes back. It's not what we have to offer you. It's what you have to offer us. What do you have to offer us? And I was kind of taken back. And so you want to be cocky with me? I'll be cocky back. And I said, well, brains and bronze. What else do you want? And he pipes back again. We don't need your bronze. What makes you think you have brains? And I really was surprised at these recruiters. And I said, well, I test pretty well.
This is the early 90s?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, probably 92 or 91. Yeah.
Just pre first Gulf War?
Yeah.
So really,
actually, I think we just done the Gulf. It was right. Actually, we had already done the start of the Gulf War. Yeah. So
they're probably getting a glutton of people coming through the door looking to serve.
I wonder, they might have. It's not the same as 2001 at all.
Right.
And actually, I remember being very scared because my brother, there was potential he was going to go ship out. That was when I was still at Marine Calendars. I still remember that. So that was earlier. Fortunately, he didn't deploy then, but I don't know if it was that.
Long story short, though, the Air Force did not leave a good impression.
No. So I'll just finish that. So he said, you test pretty, I said, I test pretty well. And he asked me if I took the ASVAB. I said, yep. I scored this. And he said, have you talked to anybody else? And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, I'm, interested in the Navy nuclear program. And he's like, oh, you're just going to fail out of that. You just won't, you'll just fail out of that. So
Mr. Encouragement.
Talk to me. And once again, kind of like the Army person, I was like, that's not how you get me to come Air Force. That's how you make me say, I'm going to go prove you wrong. And, so left a bad taste, with the Air Force, and, ended up going the nuclear, power pipeline. And actually that's I think one of the best things about the military is when you join, it puts everybody on a level playing field, and then it's what you want to get out of it, what you want to put into it. And so that was, like I said, I felt like I already had gotten my edge back, and now I'm suddenly on a level playing field with everybody, and I just went hard at it. And I scored first in every single class.
When did you end up in the Navy?
What age 20?
No, what year?
It was 93.
93. Yep. And when did you end up in Great Lakes? What month? It
wasn't Great Lakes, actually. It was Orlando. So that was back when they still had Orlando, which is where all the nukes went, because the nuclear power training pipeline was in Orlando, Florida at the time. They still had San Diego and they had Great Lakes, and then they eventually collapsed them all and just Great Lakes. So I went there in May of 93, and
not a bad time of year.
Not a bad time.
A little bit before the humidity. It was really kind of sucks in though.
It was humid.
Well, from California, it was humid.
Well, I remember doing push-ups when you were getting mashed. And it was so sweaty from the humidity, and all the windows are fogged up, that hands would slide out as you're doing push-ups, because, there's just that pool of sweat on the floor. But it was, boot camp was another experience. It was like having lived on my own, and, being one of the first questions they ask you is, or they asked us, and it took like 5 days for us to class up. I was, of course, the first day. So I got to see, we got our heads shaved the next day. But every day more people would come in, and until we've completely classed up. So it was like day one over and over, and you'd see these funny kids come in.
Groundhog Day.
Yep. And, but one of the first questions they asked, a couple of questions, was, how many of you have lived on your own? I was like one of a couple that had raised their hand. How many of you played team sports? Granted, there's a lot more that played team sports. And I remember thinking right then, like, yep, I'm going to be doing some babysitting. I think it's, because we think about it, so much of the military is, teamwork and attention to detail. And the fact of having independence, living on your own, most people, coming right out of, depending on how even independent they were from, at home, this is their first new experience. So, and I still remember my best friend, Jason, we were there the first day, and we were right on the line next to each other. And as the new people come in, one of the kids, he was one that scored 99 at ASVAB, probably on the spectrum, super smart, but not. He had this big head of hair. Well, granted, I had a big head of curly hair too. I have a great picture of getting my head halfway shaved. But so they're scaring the heck out of you those first days. And I remember going, you have to go and shave and clean, and you get like 30 seconds to shave. And we're staring at each other across the line. It's like you and I, but we're about probably 10 feet apart, where the not drill instructors, those were company commanders, the drill instructors of Marines, are, walking back and forth, yelling at us. And this poor kid across from me, probably one of the first times he's shaved, is cut like a big chunk of his lip off. And there's just this blood pooling on his lip. And he just has that look. I'm like, you kind of sneak when you can talk. I'm like, I'm going to be stuck taking care of this kid. I know. And sure enough, that was my bunkmate for the first like 5-6 weeks until like he squared away. And then I kind of finally went somewhere else. But I felt like, you've seen Full Metal Jacket, right? It was like, I was like Joker taking care of, getting the one person squared away. But it was, that was basic training, which was good. And then
silly question. When you signed your contract, was it for the nuclear program?
Yes.
This is going to sound weird, but that seems like a program that would require so much training and skill set that just a 4-year enlistment's not enough.
You're right. And it's not. It's actually a 6-year.
Okay.
So it's a 4-year. As soon as you finish the pipeline, the power school, you get an additional 2 years added on.
Okay. So you knew going in that minimum it was 6.
Yep. And I figured I'd do 6. I was thinking I'd do 6 to 8 years.
Let me take you back just a little bit. The overall experience of being in boot camp, the rules, the regulation, the being told what to do, being told what you can't do. How did all of that go over with you personally?
I don't think I had a problem with that, really. It was, and I think being in team sports, that really helps you. You're used to, that's something I always loved about movies, like whether it's Miracle or any of those sports movies. It was the training aspect that I liked. And that's what you do in conditioning practice in every sport, is you get told what to do and you do it. And you get told and you think you can't run anymore, and they say, go, and you have to go. And so to me, it was, I think being team sports really helps with going into boot camp. And I guess I didn't have an issue being told what to do. I think I knew it was ultimately, yep, they're breaking you down. Yep, you're going to be made fun of, but ultimately they build you back up. And so I guess I didn't have that problem with authority so much. And I did see, it's hilarious. OCS was actually even more funny, but they're like stand-up comedians, and especially the drill instructors and the Marines. But there was actually, I felt like I was already disciplined, but you just learn and you just do it. And then you help each other out, which is how you get through everything, in life in general. And so that was something, of course, being a teammate, since I was, 4, that's always been a big part of me. And I think it was like, maybe realize you're scared. But quickly realized I don't have a problem with this. And it was amazing learning some skills. Like suddenly I could sew, like things that, and I remember I could sew better than my girlfriend at the time, after I left boot camp, so I gained these skills that, never had even ironing things really well. It sounds kind of silly, but, there's aside from what, skills I'd already gained, it was, it does build some confidence there. And so I guess I didn't have too much difficulty with the authority in boot camp, not saying I wasn't scared though. It was definitely that.
Coming out, you stayed in Florida for your first day of school?
Correct. So in the nuclear power pipeline back then, now everything's in Charleston. So, power schools in Charleston, and A schools probably in Great Lakes where they go there. But back then, all nukes went to Orlando, and so they didn't have to PCSU anywhere else to go right into school. You did your A school there. On the nuclear program, there's 3 different rates: machinist mate, the mechanics, electrician's mate, that's what I was, and then electronics technician, which is that tends to be the nerdier one they think of. It's like a 27-week school, and it's kind of a gamble, how they pick them. And I actually went for electrician's mate, but I went through that. It's a 16-week A school, and then it takes power school. You wait every 7 weeks. A new power school class would class up. So it's a much larger group of people, that class up. And back when I was doing it, they had what's called lab assistants for the A school. And if you did really well in A school, you might be selected to be one of the lab assistants, and you'd skip 2 classes. So 4 months of school to teach labs. And so I remember until assignment, probably 10 years later, that was my best assignment, was a lab assistant. We used to go and run labs from 7, we joked that we had this schedule. We'd get up, show up at 7, go get bagels at this time, go set up for lab, and be done by 1:00. That's not, the nuclear power pipelines, 8-10 hours a day of school, followed by study, and you're getting all these personnel inspection, room inspection. It's intense. And, so it was a good 4 months. And not only that, because I was, we got a working eval instead of just a student eval. So I remember taking the E5 exam and making first increment on the E5 exam. We took it. So I started in May of 93. And in March, I took the exam for E5, made first increment, was getting paid E5 in a year of joining. You just can't do that in any other service, and only lab assistants had the ability to even do that, because for one, we had a working eval and we had time to study for the exam. We had these staff that would be like, oh yeah, make sure you look about elevators. We're like, there's no elevators on, most things, but it was an electrician's made exam. And so we studied some things and, sure enough, did well on the exam. And so you made rank faster. They don't have that opportunity anymore. I mean, still make rank faster, but nobody can make E5 in a year these days. But then we classed up for power school. That's a 6-month, and that's more intense. So A school weeds out a good fraction, and then power school weeds out even more. And I always called power school, my best analogy is being spoon-fed with a snow shovel. I mean, it's a lot of material, but they write up all the notes on the board, but you have to be able to, download and digest 8 to 10 hours worth of class each day, and then on to new material the next day. And so it was a lot of work, but it was good. Then from Orlando, once you finish power school, the last portion is prototype. So you went to where there's the actual operating nuclear reactor, and you actually learned how to stand watch and qualify on an actual operating nuclear reactor. So I actually went to Idaho. That was the last class going through there as an electrician. And that was where I learned how to ski. And we had this prototype was the most challenging, especially as an officer. But you work 7 days straight, 12-hour days, and then you get like a day and a half off, and then switch. You alternate from days to swings to mids. So you get 7 days straight, day and a half off, 7 days straight, different clock, 2 days off, 7 days straight, 2 days off, and then you do on days. You had days and then T days, and it was just you finally got a short week and a 4 off, and then rinse repeat. And it was tough though. I mean, those were those were brutal hours.
Welcome to a career that's 24 hours a day. Get to know it.
Exactly. And I guess it was kind of good for getting to understand the 18-hour day on the submarine down the road. But I actually, during that time, it's funny because remember I mentioned the counselor said, hey, I think you're one of the two that could, get accepted to the academy. Well, in Power School, I applied to the academy. I was killing it, and several other people applied, and I was beating them all as far as, academically and our PRTs, I was doing very well, but I got turned down. And because they told me I had a couple of tickets. We had a little scooter, it's called a passport, I think, when I got several tickets as a kid under 16 before I was licensed. And so they were like, we don't know if you can follow the rules. And I was bummed. Like it was a huge rejection for me. Cause I finally, like I said, got my edge back, and and then I got turned down from the academy, and these other guys who were behind me, that I was beating very easily, got accepted. And my best friend couldn't believe it. He was so we went out and got drunk. But
we'll show the Navy.
But then then I looked at other opportunities, because I did realize, I think I want to become an officer. I saw, I thought I could do it as well or better than many of what I saw just in my short time there. And so I looked at the different opportunities. There was ROTC, which you still had to pay for life for the most part. You might get a scholarship up to 100%, but then you had, where are you going to live? Like I said, I was very fiscally minded, even young. And I was like,
because you're enlisted at this point, yeah, but now you're looking at an ROTC route. So yeah, how would that have impacted had you gone that route? How does that impact your remaining time as an enlisted sailor? So
you would actually get discharged. If you went ROTC, get discharged, and then you would go into a ROTC unit. So, but back then they had multiple enlisted commissioning programs, and that's what I ended up looking at. There was one that was a nuclear enlisted commissioning program, and that one, you kept your active duty, you paid for college, but you could use your GI Bill and they would pay you, so I'd be getting paid E5, my E5 pay while going to school. And
so you continue making your salary. You use your GI Bill to pay for college. So in essence, there's nothing out of pocket to you.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And not only that, but that counts towards your retirement, and so it was a 3-year program, and granted it's nuclear, so higher grade GPA, you had to have a technical degree. And I applied for that because that made the most sense to me. And they only offered 10 schools. I was a California resident, and no schools in California. I still don't understand that. Maybe they had to have because it's nuclear power, maybe they had to have a nuclear, engineering program, which I wasn't going to study, but I remember the 3 schools. So I got selected for that. And then I stayed in Idaho and helped get the rest of the students through, and instead of going out to a C command that they'd immediately, send me to college. I just stayed on there kind of staff, and they, I remember looking at the schools, and the best 3, I was looking at what's affordable for me, highest ranking, and, where it was, is there anybody I knew? And the 3 main schools were University of Texas, Arizona, and Washington. Arizona was the highest ranked, and I was looking at EE, electrical engineering degree. But I didn't know anybody in Arizona, but it was, relatively affordable. Texas, my best friend who ended up getting out of the Navy, was going back there. So I had a good friend. They were 7th ranked in the country in EE, and the most affordable, because Texas, unlike President Obama, changed this for all states during his presidency, but they accepted active duty as resident in Texas. So made it very affordable compared to out-of-state residency. Washington, my brother was likely coming back he had went to Germany, but he wasn't sure if he was going to be able to come back to Fort Lewis in Washington. But that was another school, University of Washington, beat right through where my brother was.
Were you evaluating colleges though? Obviously you're talking about the cost, because if it exceeds a certain value, then you've definitely got to come out of pocket if exceeds
Correct.
the GI Bill. But when you're talking about ratings of the colleges, was that because you're looking at potentially outside the Navy, or was there some benefit to you by going through this program and staying in the Navy, but going to a higher rated college?
To me, it was, I wanted the best education I could get.
Okay.
And so that was what the rating had to do. It wasn't about, it was actually, I knew I was going to go in the Navy, or continue in the Navy after this, but I wanted to get the best education I could.
Because the Navy just said, and pick one of these 10 schools.
One of these 10.
Got it.
And get accepted.
Got it.
And so Texas was, I'd heard great things about Austin. I didn't know, much about it, but
quiet little town, nothing going on.
And that ended up being a great choice. Texas was so much fun. Austin is still one of the best 5 cities, I'd say, in the US. It's just, it has everything but snow skiing, but it's so hot. Boy, I remember playing golf, and you had to golf by 6 a.m. or else you'd have, a splitting headache that you just couldn't, no matter how much water you drank. But it was great. It was such a fun environment. And so went to Texas and studied electrical engineering, and I was attached to the ROTC unit. I still wasn't in the ROTC unit because I had this program. You had 3 years, technical degree, had to get a 3.0 GPA minimum, and which was the other enlisted commissioning programs in ROTC. You only had to have a 2.5 and could study whatever. And I remember even when I got there, people in my same program that were ahead of me were like, "Don't do double E. It's the hardest degree here." So go for something easier.
Hold my beer.
Yeah. And even I remember the advising, the head of advising, when you had to go figure out your plan. Here's what I had from previous college. And he immediately goes, take college physics, this summer. And I said, everybody in my program said, don't do this. Just take a couple of these, and they said, that's very tough. You'd rather, since I have a challenging commitment to, not commitment, the requirements for my program are very high, that don't go in with the hardest courses. Take that in the fall once you've, gotten your legs under you and you have a longer time to take this course. And the head of advising basically threw my stuff back at me. He's like, well, you got to figure it out then, because you're able to take this right now, and I think you should. And I was kind of taken back. Of course, I said something. I'm, look, I'm just trying to expressing what people in my same program have said. And he goes, well, if you can't take this right now, maybe you don't belong here. Once again.
Now, is this an advisor for the college, or do they have a connection to the Navy?
No, not to the Navy. It's
just simply the college.
Head of advising for the college. He was, PhD, he was a professor there as well. I had all sorts of fun with advising. I actually later wrote a letter to the dean 2.5 years later about what I thought about their advising program, and that I wanted a refund for the $700 I paid every semester for no advice. But I had to get when I finally submitted that, I had like a 3.9 GPA. And so the dean had to take me for real. Like, well, who's this person complaining? But that was my introduction to even Texas, okay, maybe you don't belong here. And it was, I guess those things are good for me. They give me reason to fight, but Texas ended up being great. It was, I was part of the kind of attached to the ROTC unit. And that's where I got to be real good friends with the Marines. And Marines are still, my wife says, you just love the Marines. And I think as a submariner, I relate more actually to Marines than I do to the rest of the Navy. because of that small team dynamic we eventually learned. But I was the only nuke that ever ran with the leathernecks, to go into their PT. And it was fun because we did land navigation, all these things that, I liked the soldiering, that, the Marine stuff, but I was a math geek. So it gave me a chance to do those things. Cause that was one thing I asked when I joined the Navy as a nuke. I said, can you become a SEAL? And they're like, no, like that, we're the only program, like you had said earlier, because we put this much time and effort into your training, this is what you're going to do. And I was like, okay.
So when you come out of Texas, you're at that point almost 6 years already into the Navy?
Yep. About 5.5. Yep. Almost. Yep. 5.5 years in.
And what are you thinking is going to be now? Have you already in your mind switched? Like, I'm going to do a full career?
No. Good question. I hadn't. So then I had to go to OCS, which was having already been to boot camp. It's, OCS, you talk to people about this, but it's 13 weeks. And it's much more attention, and it's drill instructors, which are so awesome. They are even funnier and even better than the company commanders in the Navy. But that's where actually I met my best friend in the Navy from day one. Mike Marthaler. You're welcome. But we ended up marching next to each other. And there's something like, it's a good thing when you're the person you march right next to, it ends up being your best friend, because that's the person when you're talking under your breath, when you're not supposed to, but that's your closest confidant. And we like the P days, that's when you're first doing the processing. We're sitting right next to each other. It was like this close, and we're going through our records, and they're just making sure you've got everything in order. And so I remember we're looking at our transcripts. I look over at Mike. He was Arizona State, and he took about 5.5 years or so to finish. I always joke with him about Tommy Boy, like a lot of people take 7 years to finish college. He's so sharp, but I look over at his transcript, and he's got like WWW, and we don't even know each other. I lean over and said, "What's W stand for? Wonderful?" And he like looks at me like, "Who the heck are you?" And I think that started our friendship though. And then we, OCS was its own. Having already went to boot camp though, you get like, I knew not to sleep under the covers right away. There's all those little things like not wasting your time doing things, and so I could help out much with some of the other prior enlisted through there. But I mean, it's funny to this day. I mean, I got called several things by the drill instructor. Like I was told, "Nelson, you're a thorn in my side." So Mike still, when he leaves a message to me, he's like, "Thorn in my side," 20 something years later. But that, and you just look retarded. But I mean, he ended up going.
Thanks for the compliment.
But he ended up going. He was went subs as well. And
through this whole process, even from when you first enlisted, was submarines your first choice?
Nope. And I wasn't even sure as enlisted, I was actually going to go to a cruiser because it seemed like a better. I didn't see the advantage of submarines except for just a lot more hard work. But then as I went to the commissioning program, that's when I changed to submarines, because if you go as a nuke officer to the surface fleet, you're kind of back and forth. But you're really a nuke. You go learn how to drive a ship on a conventional boat, then you go be a nuke, but ultimately you're a nuke long term. Whereas on a submarine, you go do the nuclear part, but then it's all about driving the submarine and the mission. And so it seemed like much more, that's what I want to do, not just nuclear power, but driving the submarine. And then the small team dynamic did interest me, and maybe it's a challenge as well.
So you could come onto a sub as your first duty assignment as the nuclear officer, but then work your way up to actually commanding the boat?
Down the road, absolutely. But all officers on a submarine are nuclear trained, except for the supply officer. So you come on and you're a junior officer tour, and that's where you get beat up, trying to qualify, and you first qualify on the reactor. You become the engineer officer of the watch. Then you move forward, and you're qualifying officer of the deck to drive the submarine. And so there's all these other little watches you learn, but it's ultimately become officer of the deck, where you're the CO's representative at sea. You know, like when you first even qualify officer of the deck, usually he doesn't let you stand the mid watch because he wants to be awake until he trusts you. You know, there's even that level of when the captain trusts you that he'll go to sleep while the boat's under your command, you know. And so that was what got me more towards subs. It was elite, you know, everybody had to volunteer, and it seemed like it was about the mission over just nuclear power, which is what interested me. So then he had to go back through the pipeline as an officer, you know, and so I joked that, you know, I was so dumb I had to do it twice. But you go through, and power school is actually a lot more fun. They leave you alone as an officer. And I mean, we used to play soccer 3-4 times a week.
So you had to go back through power school again?
Yep. You have to go as an officer. Exactly. So you have to go back to power school.
Did you go back to Idaho?
Nope. Idaho was closed down. So by then power school was in Charleston, in the swamp. And there was a prototype there, but there was also one in upstate New York. So I went to Schenectady. So lived in Saratoga Springs, went up to prototype there. And then you go to sub school. The Groton, Connecticut is where, you know, it's the home of the submarine force, which is kind of embarrassing because Groton's just rotten. You know, the only word that rhymes with it. But that's where you go to, you know, a quick sub school, 10 weeks of, it's kind of, you know, we think of it as a break before you go then report to your first assignment and really, you know, hit the decks running, getting qualified, having your own division, that kind of stuff, you know. So, but yeah, so you go back through the pipeline again. And
so since I've completely lost dates in my head trying to follow along, you enlisted what year?
93.
And your first time assigned to a boat was when?
So it was 99.
So 6 years?
6 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So my brother,
I don't know why in my head I was starting to lose track and it felt like it was longer.
Right. Well, because it was a long time. It was near the end of 99 actually, because it was it was the very end of 99. So I was commissioned September 18th, 1998. Then you're back through 6 months of power school, 6 months of prototype, 10 weeks of, so it was, you know, end of 99. So it was 6.5 years that I was in before I reported to my first official platform underway.
Where was that at?
And I went to, it was Bangor, Washington, or Silverdale, but everybody calls it Bangor. And my first assignment was on a boomer, ballistic missile submarine, which I kind of chose that location because that was where my brother was at, you know, and a ballistic missile submarine, though the mission's important, but we called it a 560-foot training platform. You know, the whole mission is to go out there, hide, you know,
and just be waiting.
Be a strategic deterrent. And it's an important mission, but it's boring. And the lifestyle is good relative to other, you know, the fast attacks, which is real submarining, which was the rest of my tours. But you know, because you had 2 crews, so you would, you know, there's nothing better than hearing gold crew relieve the blue crew. Like, yes, we're, you know, and then you're not in charge of the reactor. You know, you support for a little bit, but then they go out to sea and all you're doing is training. And, you know, that's where I got actually decent at golf without a lesson because we had time. But
that's what everybody thinks of when they're thinking of somebody on a submarine is playing golf.
Just, you don't. Like, submarines are probably the worst golfers, yeah, because of down periscope. Yeah, so it was 6.5 years and did that first tour. I still hadn't thought of it as a career yet. Despite, you know, so when you get your commission, you've got 5 years you have to serve from date of commissioning. And I remember we had a coach that was like a captain. He was called coach by all the enlisted guys. And he was good. Morale was good when I first got there. I remember we went out to lunch and there were like 9 pitchers of beer or something. You know, we didn't own the boat at the time. And I joked with my brother. I said, remember all those things you heard about the Navy? I'm thinking they're true.
Is food actually better on a sub?
Well, and it is better on a sub, but that's limited. Like the cooks, they take pride in the train the cooks well, and they have to, because when you're submerged on a submarine, all of your normal like pleasures are gone. And eating is one of the few things that is normal and is, makes you feel good. And so, we even exercise on a boomer. At least there's some more, but there's limited exercise equipment as well. But so yes, the food is good. But when you're underway for a certain amount of time, when you get ready to deploy or go on a patrol for a boomer, it all is frozen food. The fresh is gone within 2 weeks. And then it's however well they can make, thaw things and make it out of, but they do a great job, relatively speaking. So yes, the food is better.
When you actually selected or made the decision you were going to go subs, start watching all the movies, or were you already watching all those Crimson Tide and Hunt for Red October and all that?
Let's see. So I'm trying to think when they came out. I'd already watched Hunt for Red October. That was a great one.
Because that's early 90s, right?
Yeah. It's funny, even in college though, we used to come home after, partying at night and watching Top Gun, or at least the first, because it's the training aspect of, when they're getting told to post, and I can't believe I'm going to do this, it's the military's military. And so we watched that. That was our typical thing in college, even though I wasn't going aviation. But yeah, I'd seen those. And then Crimson Tide was probably one of the most accurate, relatively speaking, especially being on a ballistic missile submarine, seeing the 4-officer concurrence, when things came in. That was something I really enjoyed on. It was kind of puzzle solving when it was the breaking the messages. And we were being a nerd. Granted, most nukes are all nerds, but that was something I was really good at, is figuring out, like, because you had to piece them together. They give you all these errors, typically, and that was part of the drills you'd run through, is making sure you can authenticate when you need to. And heck, we were underway submerged on 9/11, and I remember, I was up in control when that happened, and that was an interesting time, because then we were running drills. And we just run a steam line rupture, which is a terrible drill. You shut all steam off in the engine room. And so you don't have any propulsion. You're coming up to periscope depth, and, and you can't just open them back up. The engine room's shut down. So it's a significant drill. And I remember as soon as the scope breaks, the surface, the first antenna that breaks, the emergency action message, you'd see the alarms going off, and our, radio man comes in, and we're running drills, and I'm damage control coordinator. So I'm the one on the sound-powered phones doing the status board, in comms with whoever's, running back there, and the captain's right here in control, making reports to him, and you just manage the casualty effort. And me and another guy were there, and all of a sudden the radio man comes in, and he walks up, and he loses his composure, and he goes, "Holy effing, if this is real," and hands the captain the message. So the captain's right next to me, and this is a new captain that's not a good captain. Morale went to terrible, and just a total micromanager, didn't trust anybody. And I remember, I'm like on the cell phones, I'm like, "You hear that?" So I kind of lean over and look, and I can see it's a real message. I see New York, but and he quickly, and then then another emergency action message comes in, and I'm like, tell the other person, like, "You've got this. I'm going to go break the message." And then we saw, then we just went immediately to DEFCON 3. We knew things were really happening. We didn't know what. And I remember we had to do things that, we'd never had to do. We'd done it in practice, and I'm like, navigator was the go-between between the officers breaking the message to the captain and the XO and giving them a heads up what's coming. And I'd be like, Nav, this, recommend securing from the drill, recommend this, recommend that, making all these recommendations. And he said, he knew our captain. He's like, he's gonna, I said, you want me to show you real quick, the proof? And he said, yes. I go, here, he's like, and left. And you hear secure from the drill, blah, 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 and so they're starting to prep to at least get a propulsion back, so we could, because we needed, you get in that situation, suddenly we're doing things, completely changing our posture at that point. And we still know what's going on. And usually as the officer of the deck, you would read what's called the ZBO, and it's the see what all the messages are that are coming on board in that broadcast, which you had to clear. The captain wouldn't even let us see that. The radio would bring it right to the captain. So we had no clue. We were frustrated. The enlisted thought the officers knew what was going on, so they're just holding it from us. All we knew was plane, New York, and so everybody was, of course, making their assumptions. But it wasn't until the next next evening at dinner that Captain called everybody in the wardroom and explained what was going on, all these messages, and trying to make an excuse for why he withheld it from us. And I've never seen the wardroom. The wardroom is the officers as a collective, that angry. And nobody, like, what he did to try to appease us did not work, and we went on from there. But then there was two people that happened to be off the sub at the time that all of a sudden we had the chaplain of the Navy on board us when that happened, and he needed to get back. So we had to go drop him off. We got our people back on, and I was on the office of the deck on the surface, driving us back out after we picked them up, and captain's up there, and he learns that a couple of people have videos, VCR tapes back then of what, and he goes, the chief of the boat.
So you were in port long enough for people to get off the...
No, you do a personnel transfer. So
somebody brought it on with them.
Yeah, somebody brought it on with them. And so we just do it. We didn't even, touch it at the pier. You just meet somebody out to sea, do a personnel transfer, and then back out.
Got it.
But when they're coming on board, the chief of the boat who's on the deck, we're up in the sail, says, to the captain, hey, these two people, both have tapes, and the crew already knows about it. Like, you can't hide it.
Right.
And he was so frustrated because he didn't want, and I was like, we're not kids. Like, we want, you have to trust us at some point.
So anybody who's operated in any type of paramilitary environment, military or first responder, the absolute worst thing you can do is hold information, especially when people know or are starting to get information. Because as a leader, that's where you're kind of behind the eight ball, and you need to start now getting ahead of it so that more incorrect information doesn't build out.
Exactly. Absolutely. And fortunately, we did get to, watch those, and then I don't know if the crew ever realized that, the officers didn't know, but that's a huge trust thing, and that's significant, especially on submarines. That's one of the things I liked so much about submarines compared to anything else, is that difference between officer and enlisted kind of goes away. It's a family. You guys have to rely on each other, to do your job, and everybody has multiple hats they're wearing. And so, that requires a lot of trust, and if you lose that trust with your men, it's hard to recover from. So I guess that was what I learned from that officer. As there's good and bad leaders, and you learn something from all of them. One's, things you want to emulate from the good, and then the others, you learn things how not to do things. And, sometimes those are maybe even more important than what you learn from the good leaders. But so at that point,
I'd imagine on a sub, bad leadership is almost magnified tenfold.
Absolutely. And we say you never know what the leader is like until you close the hatches, and submerge. And it can be, this turned from a good crew to everybody hating it. And I was wondering if it was just us being whiners in the wardroom. And I remember something happened, some incident, whatever, nothing significant. We're all in trouble in the engine room. And my first chief is a senior chief. Awesome. The guy, electrical division chief. Really, chiefs really teach the officer how to become an officer, and he was absolutely the best. But I remember he was going to extend on the sub. And then this thing happened. And I remember him saying, that's it. I'm out of here. I'm screw the extension and I'm getting here as quick as possible. When I saw him say that, I was like, okay, it's not me. It's not the wardroom. It's the whole crew is, it's sad what one person can do to the entire morale of the crew. So, that was definitely, that was a learning experience that I took to my next tour, which I wasn't sure I was going to do. Actually, you mentioned, I didn't, I'm at 10 years now, about when I'm about to leave that tour. And, I had found,
can you say generally where you were at geographically on 9/11?
I was in the Pacific Ocean.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's one thing on submarines. People know, nobody knows exact location.
Right.
There's, areas you're bound by, but you're kind of alone and unafraid. And, that's much of your orders, which is actually kind of cool, but it's also, that sometimes you're alone and maybe not so unafraid. I mean, but there's, it's a neat experience on some of those missions, not on boomers as much as when you're on fast attacks, figuring out, here's your priorities. Here's the top 10 priorities from the president. Okay, go figure it out. What you have based on, here's intel coming in, and you got to figure out what mission what you're going to go try to take advantage of, so.
With a boomer, is it more time parking and waiting, or are you still moving around a lot?
You're always moving around because the safety in a submarine is speed. But but you're going slow and quiet because you're staying undetected, but you're running drills constantly because, like I said, at boomers, we called it a 560-foot training platform. That's the length, but you're always out there just for 78 days is the normal length of the patrol, training for that upcoming inspection at the end of the patrol, whether it's there's the operational reactor safeguards exam, one everybody loves, 3 days of getting, having the dark side come down and inspect to make sure they can keep the keys to the nuclear reactor. We're the Navy's the only service that can still operate nuclear power. Everybody else has screwed it up. So, Naval Reactors, who's our nuclear regulatory commission, they come out and they inspect you, and that's why we haven't had an accident. It's because of the tight program that they run, and we joke that they're the dark side, but they're, later on down the road, when you get to know them better, they're great people as well, obviously. But that or a tactical readiness exam, which is the other, more the kind of the forward end, fighting a war scenario. So every patrol is a different. You're doing ORS tree, and that's what you do. Train up for that inspection constantly. Whereas on a fast attack, you always got the boat and you always got these inspections coming, but you're prepping for a deployment. You've always got the submarine. There's never downtime. It's a much more challenging environment, but it's real. You're the hunter killers, so you're out there doing the cool missions, whether it's intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. Much more exciting as long as you get a good deployment. But
crew wise, how different are they numbers wise?
Not much. There's about 150 on a boomer and about 136 on a fast boat. But when you go on a fast boat and you deploy, you take on all these writers. So all these experts, whether it's linguists or, um,
All
different
your
people.
intelligence people, all that type
Yep,
stuff.
yep. So certain people that just have that specific specialty, and that's what they do is go ride different submarines. We had up to 40 of them on one submarine, and suddenly it's, and the best thing you can do is treat them as crew and get them, because they're going out when you're prepping for deployment and getting them, working together. And, but it's important to treat them not as riders, but as a crew, and you'll be far more successful. So, but it was after that tour that I ended up deciding to do a career. And it was tough it was, like I said, the leadership was not good. And so I wasn't sure I wanted to. My brother he had gotten out, and he actually got a commission in the guard. And then he went full-time guard, that AGR. And he was telling me, like, look, you should just do a career. And I'm like, I don't know, this is tough, like, what if I have continued poor leadership? That's going to be, that makes long couple of tours. And,
Now, once you've gone down the pipeline for submarines, is it hard to deviate from that platform?
Yep. Once you volunteered, you are in, unless you are physically disqualified, or, you fail out, or you don't continue. Like, you have to continue to, you have to screen for department head. So you have to screen in advance to continue. But, you can't switch then. There are some lateral transfer, but it's so challenging to meet our numbers that the likelihood of that is very unlikely for the most part. Some people, have done it. I knew a couple of guys that went on a doctoral program. But most it's challenging. They're going to try to keep you, especially if you've done well.
But then on the flip side, isn't it really hard to then advance operating in a very small community?
Yes and no. It's a pretty high, like, a lot of people get out, after that first tour. They usually do a tour and then a shore duty. So you do about a 3-year sea tour as a junior officer, then a 2-year shore duty. And a lot of people use that time to either get a master's or do some easier job. That's what shore duty is always meant to be, or we always think of it as an easy job where you forget how hard it was at sea and they sucker you into signing on for a next tour. But so there is advancement. And as department head, it's easy to screen. You have to pass the engineer's exam, which is a brutal exam that you take towards the end of your junior officer tour. It was a 5-hour exam you took written, and then multiple, technical exams, to make sure you qualified to serve as an engineer officer. So that you take towards that, you get off the boat actually temporarily. You might stand duty on the weekend, but you just go to schoolhouse and study for 8 weeks, just back in nuclear power school, but getting as in depth as you can on your plant that you're going to go get hit up by NR about how well you know it. And that's not fun. Boy, that was a tough exam.
So you opted to stay in.
So I decided to stay in. Actually, I found towards the end of my JO tour, there was a message. It was about some program called the Olmsted Scholar Program. And I was like, I saw it just in message traffic, and it was about like teaching somebody a foreign language and sitting in that country for 2 years to go to grad school. And I was like, went up to my engineer, my boss. I was the assistant engineer. He was awesome. Great guy, Nate Sukels. And I said, hey, Nate, or I didn't say Nate, Inch, you know about this? And he's like, I don't know about this, but going to another country for a couple of years sounds good. I'm like, this sounds freaking cool to me. And I'm going to ask the captain about it. He's like, isn't that where they send people to France? I'm like, well, that's one country. I'm like, so nobody knew much about it. And I, went and researched about it. And I was like, this sounds like too cool of an opportunity, like getting taught a foreign language. And, I'm a math geek engineer, and now maybe getting a chance to go learn a foreign language and then go into another country for a couple of years to live and go to grad school. So I talked to my brother as well about it, and he was like, "This sounds totally cool." You know, he'd lived in Germany for a couple of years, but didn't get, taught that or get to go to grad school. And so I
So
thought,
the language school was the grad school?
nope, no, you language school is just to let you. It was a 3-year program where they teach you that language, and then you go to grad school in country.
Got it.
You know, so it's kind of like a Fulbright scholarship, but for military officers. They select at the time up to 18. So like usually 5 Navy, 5 Army, 5 Air Force, and 3 Marine, just because it's a smaller, group of people, up to that number. If they don't have people that they feel qualified, they only select that number. So you had to get selected by your service, and then you went on to it's about a year long application process, and you actually go interview in DC with the foundation once your service branch accepts you, and then they go and make the final cut. And but I remember when I was looking at doing that program and decided to go for it, that's when I was like, what happened? Okay, they only select 5 people. What happens when I don't get selected? What am I going to do? And I was like, well, I'm going to still do shore duty, which should be at 2 years. That'll put me at 12 years. And I remember, at that point, I guess is when I really said, okay, even if I have a tough tour or a couple of tough tours, I'm like, it's 8 years. I can do what, I can handle anything for 8 years. And, even, when I looked at long term, like I considered at the time, a lot of submariners go to one of the big 5 MBA programs, which I considered, but I looked at the opportunity cost of, that's a lot of, because you're not working. So how much, would I have to make to also make up for what I'm already making on a salary, and in 8 years have a pension, healthcare, so that was when I made the decision, knowing, expecting not to probably get selected for the program. Okay, well, either way, I'm going to, try to get my master's degree on a shore duty, and then, go do the next 8 years. And ended up getting selected for the program.
I was really hoping you're going with this story that you got selected. Give the lead up of everything it's about. It's like, oh no, I didn't get selected.
No, yeah. So, well, I originally thought of it as a 2-year European vacation. I wasn't very, enlightened, I guess. And especially the Navy. And I think the Navy is really our strategic arm of the military. And you think of that when our presence everywhere, what I think that has much of the strategic presence throughout the world. And so and even in this program, they were sending the Navy out and a couple of Army out to regions they wanted to reach. And I had kind of spiraled out, you put a selection of 10 countries, or actually schools that you want to go to. And I kind of started in Salzburg, Austria. I kind of rotated outside of, I think I won Brazil and, but mostly in Europe. I go and interview, and they clearly were wanting to expand us, and they hadn't sent a naval officer to India, and I was kind of like, I hadn't thought about going to India, but I said, okay, I'll adjust my list of, and I put India as one of those choices, and they ended up, and one of my concerns about India was knowing they had 26 different recognized languages. I did want to become fluent in the language, and I knew Hindi would be a challenge, whatever. But I get selected for India. And so I ended up being the first naval officer to go there, and lived in Mumbai, India for 2 years. And there was actually an Army officer he was there a year ahead of me. He was a major in the Army. So, but that was a most incredible experience. Yeah, I was there for 26 months.
What years? From when to when?
2004 through 2006. So, and that was like I said, that was the most amazing experience. India is such a fascinating place. And I remember hearing, my brother lived in Germany for a bit, and, talked about the culture shock. And I remember I went to after a year in India, went to Germany actually for one of my buddies from college, married a German girl and had his wedding in Germany. And I went there from India and I kind of laughed. I'm like, culture shock. This is Western, like, and I felt like I got such a more valuable experience going to a place like India than just going to another Western nation, because it wasn't just the language, a completely different culture that was just so fascinating and so much to learn that, it was just the most amazing experience. Maybe because Marathi is the state language where I went, my Hindi was not as great. I'd go there and try to speak Hindi. The educated people all speak English, and English is really the bridge language there as well. And so they'd like golf clap and break into English.
Please stop. Let's just talk English.
They would do that, so most of my experience, I guess, was actually with the taxiwalas, the taxi drivers. They were usually from Uttar Pradesh, which is up north, more near Delhi, which is Hindi speakers. And so I'd speak with them, practice my Hindi with them. And, I had a taxiwala that used to just come out and hang by my house each night to see if I needed a ride anywhere, because he enjoyed speaking with me. The Farangi, Farangi's kind of like a gringo, the kind of somewhat derogatory term for the white guys there. But,
what'd you end up studying for your grad program?
So when I was there, you had to study humanities. It was kind of the next year they actually opened it up, which they should have, it's about a 2-year cultural immersion program, but you don't need to study humanities. Living there is the cultural immersion. And so like in India, I should have been studying engineering or getting an MBA there, but so I studied Master of Political Science, Global Earth Studies, basically, international relations pretty much. And it was fascinating though, because they're on the British system. So I guess kind of like law school as well. It all comes down to the final exam at the end of the year. And that was my first time experiencing that, and in another country, so that was a bit nerve wracking. You didn't know how, and they also, writing concisely is not what they want. I learned they're like, nope, you need to fill out as much of this booklet when you're answering. I'm like, it seems like writing concise is the best form of writing to me, but not for the grade apparently. So, I was a bit nervous because you didn't know. And I was, you're a foreigner there. So
are you in classes mixed in with other native students, or are you going through your cohort of just military members?
No, I'm the only naval officer there. There is only the Army guy who is a year ahead, and me, and you're just dumped into the country. Actually the State Department, you're kind of attached to the State Department. So, and where we were at, they said, hey, let us help you find for safety. We're not going to let you just go and find whatever.
I'm gonna go find an apartment to live in.
And that's what people did, and that's what they wanted about the program, but they said, hey, you get a 10-day house hunting trip basically, and went there, and it was so cool. But they said, we need to keep you within a certain, reach, just for, so we know where you're at. Cause last thing we want to do is lose a naval officer, so I had an apartment in, Mumbai, and it was interesting. I had my own safe room, and it was a reality check, of like, ooh,
what kind of day-to-day security practices did you have to take into consideration?
So I didn't have to do. I tell you, I never felt unsafe there, but I did get followed, and that was likely. Wasn't my fault there, but someone else had done some things that made them a little bit questionable. And so I was getting followed around by 4 guys. I remember seeing them, like they did shifts, like I could see when, we had regionals, like I was good friends with the regional security officer at, and the different people at the State Department. So I initially check in with them, and then I sat down with the RSO, and he said, hey, um, uh, when I first checked in, because I first was there with the Army guy, he came in with me, and then I came in the next day. I'm like, I want to talk to these people by myself. And he came in and said, okay, where's your shadow? And I said, he's sleeping, and I said, okay, come in, shut the door. And he said, look, he goes, you're a submarine officer. You have a high, you have a top secret SCI clearance. You have things that people would like to know here. So you need to watch watch yourself. If you, this is classic, and it's very true for guys out there. If you think she's too good for you, she is too good for you. So it was,
she really liked me.
So it was, but he was one of my, he's still a good friend. And then the assistant regional security officer came in like 4 months later, and he was great. So they were some of my good friends. I mean, actually a lot of the State Department, but it was really getting to meet all the locals. But the day to day was, I mean, initially it was very challenging because I hadn't been accepted to the school. And talk about, you think red tape in the US? Oh, it was crazy trying to get into school there. And then I remember I was the only American there. It was all natives, and it was just so interesting. Like, and I remember the room when I first walked in the first day, it was all the women on one side, all the guys on one side. And I was like, and it was almost like, there was such deference to authority there. As soon as the professor walked in, everybody'd stand up like to come to attention. And it was very interesting. And there was one lady, she was very tough. And she initially was very curt with me. And she said, she knew I hadn't been accepted technically to the program yet. And I, of course, being a young American, when I said, when they were splitting up, they said, I said, is there a rule about sitting on the side? And they said, no. And I said, okay. So I sat on the side where the women were. Probably not the wisest thing to do day one.
How did this program quickly come to an end? His cultural awareness training lasted a day.
Well, actually, the attaché, when you first show up, you arrive into Delhi, and the defense attaché was known as the King of India. Had been there like 7 years. And this was my welcome to India too. He kind of made fun of me because I showed up in a suit, and it's super hot, but you come in dressed what you think is appropriate, so he kind of made fun of me about that. I'm like, oh, this is a great guy. And then he said, I better not have any problems with you with the State Department down there. And the military and State Department, you likely know there's a lot of clashes. Sometimes they're different cultures. And he said, if you give state, these people any problems down there, I'll kick you out of India, like that. I mean, snapped his fingers and everything. And I was like, wow, welcome to India, And that's when I went and spoke with the regional security officer, though. When I checked in, I kind of got an understanding why. They're like, okay. And so just sit on the other side didn't cause any problems, but I got along with all the State Department very well. I mean, it was just fascinating, I quickly learned, though, you think of, you do your studies before going to another country and living, and you hear like the caste system and the poverty hits you in the gut. Like, even though you think you're ready for it, that first night you drive in and you see women and children on the streets, it's just, it just hurts. You think of how hard the life is. But I remember when going to school, I'm older than most of the students. They've went to college right into grad school. But most of them they've never lived on their own. They've never worked a job. They don't cook. They have housekeepers for everything. And it was so interesting. I had so much more life experience than all the students in the class that it was really fascinating, and and they, of course, I was like a guinea pig. They're like, the American, so they'd ask me questions that I wouldn't, like they asked my age, they asked just all sorts of things that, and they were in text messaging way before we were. And initially I was like, why don't you just call? But then it quickly became fun because I'd have conversations with 6 different people going, and it was just incredible. And they were like, it was just such a neat experience. And I initially, down the road, like the professor that first kind of kicked me out of class, and I wish I remember what she said. She eventually always wanted my opinion, because she, I guess I gained her respect, but I quickly realized, look, I need to let them, when we're talking about a sensitive subject, I want to hear what they have to say because I can influence them. And so I would wait. And then, if I didn't answer something, she'd go, what's your opinion? And so then I'd express my, opinion. And so I remember even later, they were talking about the dowry and your opinions on that. And it was shocking to me because even though the caste system is prohibited by the Constitution, it's so ingrained in the culture, that hierarchy across, like it webs into everything. It's just stunning. And even dowry, which, basically the wife's family gives gifts to, how I say it, it doesn't sound nice, but they give gifts to the husband's family, and it's for taking the burden off of them, which it sounds terrible, but what other reason do you have to give gifts to take the daughter, and sadly that was too often the case where, in so many countries where women just don't have the standing, that we have here. And that's one of the things you learn living in other countries is, there's a lot of things wrong here, but there's so many things that, like that are so good. How, even though women's rights are not, there's still lots of challenges. It's so much better than it is in so many other places. And seeing that, but when we're talking about dowry, they're asking about, one of the teachers actually asked, what do you think about dowry? Is it okay? Is it, and these students were answering, these women were saying, well, oh, I think it's okay, but once you pay up a dowry, they shouldn't be able to ask for more. And these, and I was just I was stunned because they're so used to it that they think it's okay that one side of the family, and specifically the wife's side, has to pay the other. That idea just was, I finally, they said, what do you think? I said, to me, a dowry is terrible.
But you bring it back home though, and you look at some of our cultural norms. Yeah. A man asks a woman to marry him. He gives her a ring. The unofficial norm is 2 to 3 times your monthly salary.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's nothing, you can't go find that in writing anywhere. It's not in our Constitution. It's just how we do things.
It is.
And you are judged by your peers and the other family by the size of the engagement ring that you give to your future wife.
That's true. What's because one of the jewelry companies, how else could 2 months salary last a lifetime? I mean, they throw it right in there to tell you how much you should pay. And so much, probably for, you think back in many, many years, like, thousands of years, that was what women had, was jewelry as their only source of net worth. And so, I think that all plays, absolutely. I mean, sadly, a lot of these things don't just go away just because we have a new constitution.
Yeah, I was just saying it's the differences in our cultures, and what's normal for us may somebody else is like, that's crazy.
You're right.
It's just how cultures operate, and sometimes we step into their culture and we try to bring our culture with us, and it's not necessarily that ours is better or theirs is wrong.
No,
let them live in their culture.
Yeah, no, and there's good things. What I found was there's things you loved about America. But there's also things that every country you go to that are beautiful and that you want to take home. And, the number of those things in India. And heck, I remember even, that was one of the beautiful things. That was one of the, I guess, one of the few good things about social media was that just was starting soon after really I left India. And so I was able to keep in touch with, so many of these friends I made over there. And, it was outstanding. But the hardest people to say goodbye to were, I had a part-time housekeeper and a driver. I'll tell you, it felt really weird having a housekeeper and a driver as a young lieutenant there, being an American independent, and I almost felt bad. Like that's, but you do need a part-time housekeeper. Things are just dirty. Food preparation, there's so much more to it. And then especially in Mumbai, if you have a car, there's no place to park. So your driver's kind of like you're moving parking meter. And I realized, even though that seems crazy because I'd never have a driver, that stuff here, there as a lieutenant, and Americans, we pay better salaries than locals. But I could support 2 families easily and give them their livelihood, and it wasn't much off my back. And that would have been ridiculous to their economy if I didn't have that, if I wasn't, supporting that like that. And so, but it was for me, they were my insight really to the culture, to, outside of the Bollywood, like because you walk in as a lieutenant, you're instantly in the top 1%. And so you're, the circles you make friends with, it tends to be, people that are doing very well in India. Now you've got people that are from the village that, I had to sit down with both my driver and my, housekeeper multiple times and kind of get them, like they weren't used to somebody that, when I ask my housekeeper, how are you doing? And she says, fine. And we go about our way. I was like, look, when I ask you how you're doing, I want to know, how are you doing? I want to know how your boys are doing. And if they're sick, I don't want you to come to work, and and she's like, she didn't get it. And I said, look, I don't need you here. Like if you have something more important to take care of, and your family is more important than me, then let me know. It was, she had never had that. And like, even they have the servants' quarters, where and I saw that immediately, that squatter bathroom, and I had my place, I had a spare bedroom. I said, you can have use this bathroom. And, and she appreciated it like nothing else. And I learned from her then, she would share so much she never share with anybody else. And it was my insight to the village life, and I learned about dowry deaths, like even her neighbor that, got kerosene poured on her and lit on fire. Like she shared those things, quickly. She would share those kind of things with me. And she had another, a friend of mine who was a great friend, probably my best friend leaving India, American of Indian descent, but was back there doing business. And, but she wouldn't say the things to him that she would share with me. And, it was incredible, I remember, I eventually went, before I left, I took pictures with them in uniform, I got them my whites, and gave them some framed pictures, and went and saw their family. And I was the only employer that had ever went to their home. And that was touching, like, because when you're getting ready to leave, you hope to find them employment, and hopefully an American, like for me, because that's what they're used to working with me, that would, pay them similar, but more than that, treat them like they had been getting used to being treated. And that was tough. And I'm still in touch. I haven't, my housekeeper, I'm in touch with her. We became friends on Facebook, and the driver, I think, went back to the village. Unfortunately, I've tried to get back in touch with him, but haven't. But they were the ones that were really by far the most, difficult to say goodbye to, where you didn't know if you were ever going to really be in touch again. So
Were they placed with you through a company, or did you find them on your own? Like,
found it.
kind of like put a Craigslist ad.
Some they have, through, usually it's through the State Department, and they might, ultimately it's referrals from, they have a friend that needs a job. That's kind of how it wasn't Facebook, this is, Craigslist or anything like that. And then my driver came as a reference from somebody else. And he was, I've got some interesting stories, but I won't waste your time with him, but some touching stories, with him and his baby.
Where I was going with it is they were not placed with you by the State Department so that they would just be placed with the next American.
Not at all. Nope. And I would give them like when I was leaving to the State Department, I'd say, here's her. And then ultimately people would come in, and there might be a kind of a pool of people, or friends that you got to know. They would say, hey, I recommend this person. Okay. So I introduced them to the State Department pool, I guess you could say, but then people would go and interview who they actually wanted for the job.
Got it. Coming out of that, did that open up any different opportunities, or was your only option to go back to a sub?
Only option is to go back to the sub. And have you ever seen The Opposite or Seinfeld? There's this
the Bizarro Seinfeld or whatever.
Bizarro, but it was one where he was even Steven. Like, it was the one where George decided everything he decided in life was wrong, so he went with the opposite. And then Elaine was really on top at the start, and then George changed every decision to be the opposite of what he thought, and everything started going great for him. And Elaine had problems, and George's like, or Jerry's like, I'm even Steven. That's life though. And I feel like I knew coming out of that experience in India, I was going to come on a terrible tour because it's even Steven. That was like the most incredible experience that I knew I was going to have. Life was going to even up.
I got to do payback.
I got to pay my penance. And I sure did. That next tour was, you had to go from there, you go to department head school and then on to the next tour. So, that next tour though was probably my most life-changing tour. And, well, it probably took 10 years off of my life. I wouldn't change a thing at this point.
Was that on a boomer or a fast attack?
Fast attack. Yep.
Switching from boomers to fast attacks, what's the process like?
So there's not really the process. It's not like you have another school to go to or anything. You go to department head school, which we kind of call navigator school. It's where you do a lot of focusing on kind of navigator skills, since most of our training has been engineering side. And then a lot of time at periscope depth, which is what you don't get a lot of on a boomer. And so as a boomer guy, you're kind of made fun of because you just don't have quite the experience that people on fast boats get, because they're in and out all the time, surfacing submerged. Whereas on a boomer, you go out, you stay submerged pretty much, and run drills. But it's a different engineering plant. So you got to qualify on a new reactor plant. So that takes a little more work. But as far as driving the ship, you qualify off the deck, and they expect you to be qualified when you get out as a department head within 2 weeks or so. Driving the sub is driving the sub. There's differences definitely, but not enough to where, and especially after you've just done a 5.5 month, department head school, you're ready to drive the ship, to drive the sub. So there's not much of things to prepare you for the differences, except for it. And you're going to have a bad reputation by coming from boomers. There's going to be this kind of, until you prove yourself, you're going to be like, oh yeah, you're one of them. And that's what it was even like in department head school. So
did you find, or within the submarine community or submariner community, does the greater majority go to boomers to start and just a few of the really good ones go to fast attacks? Or
Nope. The majority go to fast boats because that's what we have more of.
Okay.
And so they usually try to get the officers all to have at least one boomer tour, but real submarining is fast attack.
Got it.
And I went there just initially because of location, but and it was good, and it was worked out well. Went to India, then came back, and then I was supposed to go to San Diego, which is where I was wanting to get to, and I was going to be a navigator on a good boat, and then a couple of weeks before reporting, Kurt, we need you in Norfolk. And it's not going to be good when they change orders at the last minute. And they were having this happen a lot when we were getting into department heads. That was, I guess, when I first started department head school in July, they had already 15 department heads had quit that year. Some of them fired. And when it quit, they quit because they were just shoved. There was enough department heads going through, probably the 2001, number of people that had joined, that captains were, in my opinion, and later on an admiral told them that basically they weren't going to take the time to train their men, and they were just going to make it as miserable for them as possible. And they'd try to get them to quit and hope that they'd roll the dice and get a better department head. So, when we went to department head school, the admiral came and talked to us, basically told us all we were a bunch of, we didn't know how to work hard, blah, blah, blah. It was very frustrating because I was like, you don't even know who we are.
Bunch of prima donnas.
Yeah. Like you don't even know us at all. Why are you, is that supposed to motivate us? Disgusting. But, anyway, I ended up going, I'd say it was probably the worst submarine in the fleet at the time. It had just come out of 2.5 years in the shipyard, and shipyard ruins all boats. Your mission goes away, teamwork goes away, and the Navy has never been able to figure this out. And it's just tragic what happens to crews in the shipyard.
Because when a boat goes into the shipyard, the entire crew stays with that boat.
The crew stays with the boat, but then you kind of give it off to the shipyard. And so you're standing some watches, and it's initially probably really good for them. Life's easy, but then when you're trying to get out of the shipyard, life sucks. And it's people are suddenly on shift work. They're working 12 on, 12 off, and especially the nukes in the back. And then everybody at certain point. So it comes to be terrible. And especially coming out of the shipyard, unlike a new commissioning boat, you guys used to be operational. So there's not the same kind of support that you get from a new commissioning boat, where they know you don't have the admin and all the other things, that you do on an operational submarine. So this submarine was supposed to get decommissioned actually, but then they changed their mind and decided to refuel the reactor. And they had this extended long shipyard period. Then they changed home ports. I met them January of 2007. And then we immediately went to sea for way too aggressive. It was a preparation for a carrier to get to on deployment. So we're doing serious war exercises that this crew was not ready for.
Not like an easy just shake the rust off.
No. That was scary. And then we came back in and then went right back into a shipyard period for 6 months, a modernization as we ripped out all of fire control, sonar, replaced all that. And I was a weapons officer. So it was all my gear. And it was miserable. It was 95 to 120 hours a week of, not counting commuting time, with a crew that everybody hated the submarine. So it was a very trying period. And then we finally finished that up. We went to sea for 2.5 months to do their first reactor inspection in 5 years. This crew had been operational 4 out of the last 48 months. It was, tough times. I remember there's one of my best, the person I've served closest with. I'll never probably work as closely as with somebody, my peer, the engineer on there, Tim Yannick. He um, he showed up before me. We had another peer that was not good at all. And so him and I had to work. We worked very closely trying to turn this thing around. And it was a lot. We both said, I've said it probably took 10 years off my life, but we did turn it around, and we went from the worst, to having, I remember when we finally did our deployment, when we were driving back to actually go pull into a port to give a report to a 3-star. The local admiral wrote us down and got on the mic, the 1MC for the whole ship. And he said, Jacksonville, you guys just did the best SSN deployment in over 10 years, and it was like, that was on everybody's eval, and fitness report was that statement. Cause and it was great. We went from worst to suddenly the best deployment. SSN is a fast attack. So it was great to turn that thing around, but, the trials kept going as we changed home ports. Then after deployment, went to Hawaii, some bad things happened. We had a scram, which is, an unplanned, reactor protection. And, suddenly we went from being on the top to now you can't do anything right again, just one. And so it was definitely a challenging tour, but that was where I really felt like, I guess that's where I came into my own, is in leadership. And, where I knew from the previous, when I first stepped onto that submarine, I instantly saw the morale, and, it was reminding me of what I'd come from the previous tour and and I was like, there's no way I'm going to live like this for 3 years. It's going to kill me. So, and knew it had to come from, now I had a whole department though. And so I could have real influence. And so after a couple of months of seeing it was, I went and ended up having having my kind of, I guess, first real pep talk, with my department. And we started turning things around, but it's not easy. That's for sure.
Now, you ultimately did, though, more than 20 years. So
correct.
Things turned around enough that you weren't basically just like, okay, I'll grin and bear it to my 20. What was the big catalyst change for you that helped you stay in another 5?
So even that tour, like, Tim and I both agreed it was so challenging, but what we formed there, that nobody has been able to ever build that same kind of camaraderie. Even how the military is with good and camaraderie, nobody's been able to build what we built there. It was, it was something else, and probably shared suffering, but we wouldn't change a thing. We both agree. Like, yes, it was it was trying on my soul, but it was fundamentally what made me who I am. And then I went on to my next tour, which India supported this. All of a sudden I'm wanting to, so we changed home ports to Hawaii, and I'm looking to stay in Hawaii, for my shore duty. And there's some jobs, and the detailer, that's our job placement officer. He's like, hey, there's an admiral's aide position. And I'm like thinking at the time, admiral's aide's a tough shore duty, and depending on the admiral, might be a jerk, might be someone great, but you could work really hard for nothing. I'm thinking, I'm just coming off the most difficult submarine tour, like, is this what I want? And, but he gives me the bio of the admiral, and talk about not feeling worthy. It was, Admiral Patrick Walsh, Pat Walsh. Amazing. He's an incredible leader. But he was a Blue Angel, a White House fellow. Like, I'm not worthy, and I remember,
done some stuff in your career.
And I remember, like, so we're getting ready to go to sea, and he says, the detailer says, hey, I need your updated bio. So I'm at home, it's typical submarine. I'm at home at 8:00 at night. I'm like trying to write up a bio, send it off, and we're going to sea the next morning. So I sent it off at like 10 p.m. go to bed, get up, go in, and you're getting prepped for underway. And all of a sudden, I get a call from the detailer saying, "Hey, the Admiral's interested in you." And I'm like, "Okay, we're getting underway." He's like, "Well, stand by for a VTC in a couple hours. We're getting underway in 3 hours." And I'm like, "We're getting underway, for a couple of weeks." He goes, "Stand by." I'm like, "Okay," and go about my way. And all of a sudden, anyway, the captain, says weapons officer to the CO's stateroom. And I go in there, and it's not the Admiral, but his whole personal staff is on the phone to do a phone interview. And, captain's like, "Here, you got my stateroom. I'll be down in the wardroom when you're done. Let me know how it goes." And I'm like, "Okay." So I on a phone interview with his executive assistant, who's a senior captain, senior 06. And then it's the rest of his staff, good people. But you're just out of the blue interviewing, and, get done with it, go down and let captain know, "Hey," he's like, "How'd it go?" I'm like, "I don't know." Thought it went pretty well, but it's a phone interview. I can't see their expressions, but, anyway, we pull back in, and the Admiral, we're doing the command course. So doing a bunch of crazy stuff out at sea with all these people looking to go to CO and XO. And, we come up to surface, and we're doing assisted landings, not using a tug to drive the submarine, park the submarine pier side. And so I get off to go interview with the Admiral in person, and his wife at their home. I had the mid-watch. I haven't slept in over 24 hours because I had the mid-watch, and then we're on the maneuvering watch, which is all hands on deck as you're driving the submarine in. So I get in my whites, I'm like, great. Of course, I haven't slept for 24 hours. Now I got to go interview with a 010. But I go and meet with him. Things go well, and he hires me. And I was like, why was he even interested in me? I'm like, it had to be the India thing, because all officers go through kind of the same thing. You go through our training, you go to your first tour, you do a shorty, department head tour, et cetera, and I'm like, it had to be, I did something different, and sure enough, I learned later that was a driving, factor, that, and he was a Middle East expert and now he's suddenly the Pacific Fleet commander. And so, me being India expert, and it was, so anyway, it was an awesome tour. It was just a little over a year. Then I needed to get onto my next tour, but I mean, I went from being a submariner to, our first international trip, we fly to Japan, and he has a G5, and I set up as the aide, you set up all the logistics and, the calendar, like every single minute of the day. And, but this was a wake up call, or just enlightening. We fly on the G5 to Japan. We land. There's a helicopter waiting. We debark the plane, go right to the helicopter. Helicopter takes us, lands us on top of some hotel or some building. We go down to the bottom floor. There's cars waiting to take us to our destination. I was like, wow, this is who I'm working for now.
This is the good life.
And it was, it was fascinating.
But what's the op tempo like for you guys, keeping that machine running?
Oh, it's very, very high paced. Like I remember I used to get up at 3:30 in the morning. By then I'd built on the Jacksonville tour just to I built my own garage gym because gyms weren't open early enough. And then I was too exhausted, at 8 o'clock to work out. And that was the best thing I could have done. But, so I'd get up, do my workout in the garage gym, and then go, be to work. And it was very high op tempo. And we were probably out away from, that was Makalapa in Pearl Harbor, right next to Pearl Harbor. But we were away from there at least 45% of the time. So it was very, very high op tempo, but it was this was such an amazing tour because we're meeting, especially with, a 4-star admiral from the U.S., you're meeting presidents and, leaders of other countries, and it was fascinating to realize how much all of our foreign relations are based on personal relationships. And if you don't have that communications, when we cut off ties, you don't know what the other person's thinking. And seeing that, firsthand, it was such an incredible experience for me to realize, just kind of seeing, I'd studied political science and international relations, but now I'm realizing it's all about personal relationships. And those people, they know each other, and that's where, decisions are made. And when there's issues that come up, they know who they can call and hopefully resolve things peacefully, or, so it was neat. And I remember he was just coming in as the commander. So, I got to help him as he did the change of command and everything else. And he didn't even have his own business card or anything. So, coming from India, I had my own business card, and I had, of course, Hindi on the back, and so when we made business cards, I went up to the admiral and said, "Hey," I didn't say, "Hey, sir."
They really like it when you start, "Hey,"
I said,
"Yo, dude."
I said, "Admiral," I said, "I'd like to take your business cards and, put your information in the languages of the different countries we're going to go visit, and present it to him." And he goes, "Did you do this in India?" I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, I said, "No, it went over very well." He goes, "I bet it did." Because that's an excellent idea. So that I was able to, it took a lot of work though, because you're talking to the N5 shop, and they're doing all the operations and international stuff. And they have some young aides. It's like, "Hey, I need these." and they were resisting. I'm like, "Look, I'm not trying to add work, but this is important." And the admiral thinks it's important. And too many aides take the rank of their, and I never liked that, but I knew my place. But I was like, "Look, this is important, and it's not that much work. All it is translating a couple of words, and, I'll take care of the printing, but this is important." And it was, and watching him present the business card, I taught him how to present, using two hands in different countries, just the right etiquette. And, but seeing the reactions of these other foreign leaders was just, especially smaller countries like Malaysia, it instantly changed that relationship, or, because this is the first time he's meeting them, because he's the new commander.
Right.
And so it just started those relationships off right. And it was just beautiful to see, so to be a part of that was, something else.
And that was a 1-year tour?
It was a little over 1-year tour. And that's because I needed to get to my next assignment to stay on. Because normally that Olmsted Scholar program was so long, and my first tour was so long, that I was getting behind my year group, and you have to stay with it. So then I went on to EXO, and went from, the worst sub to a great sub. And that was interesting. Then it was more like kind of just keeping it going. But that was a great tour. And, went on from there so things went well. That's why I ended up doing 25 years, but I got married, met my wife in San Diego. That was my EXO tour. Met her there towards the end of my tour when we were in the shipyard, again. And, I stayed on at Squadron for a while, and then we got married, 10 days later, I had to go to DC. My wife was not, she's a professional architect. And all of a sudden I have to, "Hey, honey, I know you've been working here for 15 years, but we're going to DC now." So, and that's a tough job. Architecture is very regional, companies are not like what I think of, like a lot of military spouses that have successful careers, teachers and nurses, where there's a need everywhere you go. And so went to a tough tour in DC. Nothing like doing that as a newlywed, but it was, I was this submarine officer, community manager, nuclear officer, program manager. Real tough assignment, but really, really good. It was setting policy for our entire submarine force and the nuclear, officer program. But the then it was a good time to.
But again, that's going to be, in theory, not a very long tour.
About a little over 2 years. They're normally 2.5 years. So, and then it was, hey, this is the right time. I'd taken away from her sister, who was, they had worked together for 14 years at the same company. We had 2 young nieces now, that were, important parts of our life. And so we were trying to get back to San Diego and, do a final tour and transition. And, so I was fortunate. It was hard to get back to San Diego, especially as a submariner, but I was able to, but I had to go on then I was on a carrier, because that was the only thing I could do, is get on a deploying asset and I was part of this carrier strike group. So the Admiral has a staff of like 60 people. It's a 1-star Admiral that, they embark the carrier, and then he's in charge of, the whole strike group, the carrier.
So you're in essence his advisor to the submarine community, or what?
That, and I also did future plans. So I was like their planning officer for operations. And so I worked directly for the operations officer, the 06. And then, but it's a tight group, and the Admiral and the chief they're still, really good friends of mine, but we became very tight because on the carrier, it's so much different. It was definitely a lot easier than a submarine. But they have unlike where we were challenged with one, treadmill. If we were lucky, like we did, got a rowing machine, got a couple bikes. And I brought a lot of my own free weights for that department head tour to make us a somewhat good gym. On the carrier, they have multiple gyms, but they also have a contracted fit boss. So some civilian they hired to come out and there's a health and wellness. So it was like having your own CrossFit gym.
Oh, wow.
On deployment. And she was amazing. And so, and the Admiral, the chief of staff, and I were always in the classes together, and we became fast friends. And then there was a rowing competition, Concept 2. You might be familiar with that, the February competition they do. That happened on our deployment. And the good story about that, but I created our team and had the Admiral on our team of 6. And it was a great final tour. It was different, but now I'm working with aviators, SWOs, very few subs. I'm one of the few submarine guys, but it was definitely the guys that worked for me. They weren't used to having an 05 submarine officer, and they were used to someone more standoffish, I guess. And it was just like sub, hey, they're my guys, and so we had a great relationship, and that was just a lot of fun. That's where I really I had been in my previous tours, but I remember the Admiral and the chief of staff, they called me the coach of the strike group. And I was big with Ellen Healy, our fit boss, with the fitness side, but also something I'd learned from my JO tour is money. These sailors, don't know anything about money. And that was, as an officer, maybe it's because I was enlisted and an officer, maybe I empathized with both, but I knew where I came from in my background, about money, that I wanted to help get these people, not only help professionally, personally, but also financially, and get them on the right track, because, as fast as I could. And initially I brought in outside people before I felt confident to, teach this stuff myself. I brought in military friendly people, but I learned quickly they weren't very good on my, department head tour. And I just needed to learn this stuff well enough to teach it. And I started teaching it. And on the strike group, I started providing, initially taught our strike group, and went and it was beautiful, because these young sailors they're opening up Roth IRAs. They're contributing more to TSP. They're doing things that are going to help them. They're going to change their lives long term. And the Admiral, and chief of staff were so supportive of it. It was, they liked what I was doing, and that reached out to other we were a small command inside that, but then with the carrier and then the air wing, they're like, hey, I heard you taught these classes. Do you mind coming? And so that was a great a great experience as my final tour.
Were you already thinking that aspect for your next iteration coming out, or was it just something that you were passionate about?
So I was passionate about it. And as I was looking towards transition, I did consider that. I went to multiple, Ruling course was one of the first 3-day, it was a good 3-day transition course. And I remember the first night they ask you, the professor says, hey, go home tonight. And, if you think about what your dream job is and write some things down about it. And I remember thinking, I said, it was really a life coach, but holistically, and money being a big part of that, because that was one of my expertise, what I was fast becoming an expert in. I remember I talked to the fit boss. I remember thinking later, I wasn't looking at it the right way, but I asked her, I said, hey, have you ever heard of like a gym, wellness center that also has like a financial planning arm?
That's what every gym needs. That and a bar.
Yeah. And she looked at me like I had something growing out of my head, like, no. And I realized I wasn't thinking about it the right way. It was financial planning is the core, and then helping them out holistically with the rest, and so more of a life planning, but finances being the key thing. And so I initially considered going into financial planning, but I still didn't have any certifications at the time. And I was doing informational interviews, which are one of the most important parts of transitioning well, in my opinion. And that for multiple reasons. It can show you this is not what I'm interested in and won't waste your time going down a path that you're ultimately not going to like. And that's what happened with the financial planning. I was looking at doing that. This gentleman, very nice, took like an hour and a half with me, and he wanted me to come work for him. And we were talking, and he was explaining, and he said, obviously you start out, not making much money because you got to build a book of business, but on and on we were talking. And then towards the end, he said, look, ultimately you just want to find a few, rich clients and protect their money. You don't want to deal with the middle class. They ask too many questions. It's just too much work for, the amount of money you make. and it just hit me wrong. Military, law enforcement, we are middle class. And that's who I'd served and would want to serve. That's who I want to help. I didn't want to just protect rich people's money. I wanted to help people build wealth, and you know what I mean? And so I can still remember driving home, where I'm exiting Highway 56 when I just kind of it was like Heisman, like I can't be a part of this. That was great because then I didn't waste my time going and studying Series 6 and these other exams. And I could narrow my focus and go, okay, if I'm not going to do that, what am I going to do? And that's when I really looked at what my priorities were, which I had interests all over the place, but I was like, okay, I am good at managing projects. So maybe I'll look at program management or maybe some business development. Let me look at the best companies in San Diego. And, cause to me, it had to be a mission I could support, which is why I couldn't be a part of that. I wanted to be in San Diego, but then it was culture, room for growth, fair compensation, in that order. And so that really helped me narrow my focus into what companies I was looking at. Cause if people didn't like working there, I didn't even waste my time. And so, that helped me select a small number of companies that I was interested in, and ultimately network my way in. That's how I landed at Viasat. But quickly at Viasat, people are like, a bunch of high-tech innovative engineers, but they're like, enough people are like, how do you know all this stuff about money? And I said, years of self-study, and I offered a lunch and learn. And that went over very well, but then COVID hit. So we're kind of away. But during that time in COVID, all these people were telling me that had just attended. There was like probably probably 15, 20 people in class and about 20 people online. And the number of people made changes though. And they're like, this, was really helpful. And so, remember months later, we were getting ready. We were having, it wasn't even my meeting, but a meeting with some younger procurement, specialists. And before everybody's in there, the email had just come out about the employee stock purchase plan. And so I couldn't help but say, hey, you new people, if you haven't signed up, or even if you've been here a while, recommend doing this, blah, blah, blah. And the leader of the meeting said, yeah, Alan's our, vice at CFP, and I was like, I'm not, but, and one of the young guys young Marine actually, in there came up to me, day later or so, said, hey, I heard you did this class before. Do you mind doing that again? I said, yeah, why don't you reach out to some of your friends, and see, especially the new ones that, and see if they're interested, and we get 15, 20 people. Absolutely. And so I reached out to people as well. And within a day, we had 25 people that were interested. So did that. And of course, I typically have too many slides to cover in an hour. And so, we're getting on like 10 minutes left. And I'm like, I need to get to the
There's still 40 slides to go.
Yeah, yeah, at least probably 20. And I let me get to the important slides at the end, because I kind of have like summary and homework for them, because I want it to be actionable. And I said, let's get to these. And when I get there, I'm like, look, if you guys found this helpful, we could to have another session and get through what we didn't. And if you guys want, we could dig deeper into individual topics. And like every hand went up in the Zoom call, and the guy who actually asked for the meeting initially, he comes off mute and says, oh my God, yes. And I was like, okay. And that's when I realized this is what I need to be doing. Like, and I need to go get my certification, because this is my passion and I'm good at it, and people, I was like, I need to really get my credentials, and then let me start my own business, because I learned there's a better way. You don't have to just protect rich people's money, but you learn as you go along, and you can start your own independent firm, and you don't have to, charge ridiculous fees or sales be, just commission products or anything like that. So it was a learning experience, but then that was when time to go back to school. I had to go take the classes for the CFP exam, but as a veteran, fortunately, there's the American College, and I was able to get a scholarship. So, that was in December. Decided then that's what I was going to do, or learn. January, I found out about the American College and their scholarship. Applied February, I'm taking classes. So it was, and everything just kind of clicked. Just it seemed like it was meant to be. So,
for reference point, when did you come out of the military?
I came out April 2018.
And you started taking the CFP courses February of
2022. So I'd been already teaching this stuff for years. And then the CFP curriculum made me realize, okay, certain things I need to teach better, like specific aspects of estate planning, things like that. But so that was, I started, February 2022 was when I started the classes, and those are kind of self-paced, but I kind of burned through them pretty quickly. And, it's typical. What do we do? You get up early and get things done. And so I'd get up at 5 and go do my work before my day job. And then I was at a point where I finished 7 of the 8 classes, enough to take the exam at the end of March. And I was like, okay, I could take the exam. It's 3 times a year, July, November, or March. And I just had enough time where I could take the exam in July if I, got busy right then. Cause even taking those classes, you still should take a prep course, cause it's a brutal, the CFP exam, it's a 6 hour and 40-minute exam. They consider it on the level, I don't think it's on the level of the bar exam, but that's what, there's a 60% passing rate typically. So, and not being a regular in the industry, I knew it was going to be a bit of a challenge. So It was the right time. I knew the fall wouldn't be a good time with what normally happens with a lot of strat planning and other things. And that's when we like to vacation. So I took the final class that I had to take, the prep course. Work, of course, it gets busy, but passed the exam in July and kept working, getting experience hours and, earned the certification later that year. Actually, on the exact date of my commissioning date, it was pretty, it was like, it seemed like there was meaning there, and then slowly started figuring out how to launch my own, my own firm. So.
And when did you kick off your own?
And actually July this year, I just, so I coached my niece's soccer team right after that exam period, which was an incredible experience. People, especially transitioning, doing volunteer work is something we all have this, I think, sense of need, a duty of service, and volunteering is a great way when you might lose, much of that camaraderie that you have in the service. Volunteering is a great way to still have that. And I mean, heck, my sister-in-law asked me to go coach her soccer team, and a couple of weeks out, I was not ready. The whole imposter syndrome, which we all feel too, I think, coming out of as we're changing careers, I felt it a lot, especially just being an uncle. Like you hear about the toxic sports parents. I'd never coached youth sports, and heck, well, whatever, go do it.
How was your transition though, as far as coming into civilian life?
It was tough. And that's why I think I teach at so many classes. I work with like 8 different organizations helping people with transition. Because it's hard for everybody. And I had a successful transition, but it doesn't mean it was easy. And the, from figuring out what I wanted to do, that mission was initially the hard part. And whether you're separating or retiring, it's challenging for both.
Did you already have Viasat set up when you were EASing out?
No, I was working on it. So, and you don't, like anybody, you don't put everything in one basket, but I went to Operation Connect. It's a great one-day transition course offered by the North San Diego Business Chamber. And I went to that. And then the next day, the Viasat had a Viasat Veteran Transition Workshop, which a friend of mine from my MBA program, USC, I went to my last year of the Navy and then first year at Viasat, I was doing an executive MBA. And he had just started at Viasat. He's like, hey, they're doing this one-day workshop. You should go. It's and I'd heard great things about Viasat. And so I went to this one-day veteran workshop, and it made Viasat like one of my top 3 choices. It was, I was like, this is exactly the kind of team I want to be a part of, and they have it's a great experience. We're going to actually do it again in March. We do probably March 6th this year. But everybody there, they give you a tour around the place. They talk about transition. They do resume review. There's a networking lunch. So people, all these people come and you eat with like multiple, Viasat employees. And it was like they were already advocating for me. It was really bizarre, but I was like, yeah, this is who I want to, this is a team I want to be a part of. And that was December. It was Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, 2017. And then of course, I tried to start doing informational interviews. I only got one because it was the holidays. And she was like the military liaison, 22 years in HR. She told me like, yep, you should apply right now. Your resume looks great, and I'm thinking, yes, and so I applied to 3 roles in early January and crickets, And that's transition though. Like things look good. And then, it's like, I call it a sine wave of emotions. It's like, mostly there's a lot of trying emotions. But then there's things that look good. But, anyway, I got a few names from other people, and I ended up doing like 5 or 7 informational interviews. I actually did a program. Actually, I did probably 5 of those, but I did a little project for the MBA program with them as well, because they wanted it with your employer. I'm like, I'm leaving the Navy. How about I do something with, a company I'm interested in? He's like, absolutely. And, so I kind of networked my way in, and these people, they helped me out a lot. Like the one guy, he said, look, I think you're probably applying for roles that are too beyond you. You have a great operational record, but you haven't, I worked at SPAWAR for, 15 years. So I've been doing this stuff. You've been an operational sailor the whole time. You might need to start at a little lower position, because you come in, they're going to expect you to know this. You don't know this company. You don't know JIRAs. You don't know all this stuff. And he goes, it might be a little lower pay than you want, but it might be the thing that gets you in the door if that's what you want. And then sky's the limit from there. It was just what I needed to hear. And he also told me my tailored resume sucked. But that's what you need, is real honesty. And I remember my wife even said, you should probably give up on Viasat. And I wasn't going to give up, but I never left, things to just at one place. And ultimately I guess in April I got out, and I applied to another role about kind of end of March at Viasat, another couple, but this time, 3 of the people that I did informational interviews with, I let them know. I said, hey, I applied to these, these roles, and they all sent my resume and an endorsement to the hiring manager saying, take a look at this person. And, I did not expect that at all, but that's what people need to understand, how these informational interviews work, how, in this digital age, you just to throw on a resume out there, you're not going to be successful. You need internal advocates, and did that give me the job? No. But did it give me an interview? Sure. The hiring manager would have had to be an idiot not to at least give me a chance, but, and I was fortunate, because
Did you take the first guy's advice and refocus the positions you were applying for and kind of drop down a little bit?
I did. I dropped to the deputy role, and then I was separately, applying elsewhere. And I actually interviewed earlier at ASML, Cymer at the time. And that was an interesting one. That I had to actually do. I actually had to create I had to go brief them an hour-long project on something I had done in the Navy, which I know some other people that they're like, I'm not doing that work. And I considered it as well. I'm like, and so much of I did.
That's an in-depth project. You got to do an hour presentation.
Yeah. It's 45 minutes presentation, then 15-minute Q&A. And I've got to figure out, how do I make what I do, which is mostly classified, dumb it down to, not dumb it down, but you know what I mean? Make it, sterilize it and get the point across. But I decided
I was on a boat with some really big missiles.
So I did it, and that was great, because I ended up getting, I interviewed with them, their whole, process and doing that. And nothing like a bunch of guys hearing somebody talk about doing a, modernization program on a submarine. It was pretty, they were pretty interested.
Did you line up the coffee pots right in front of them?
Yeah, exactly. Give them some mud coffee though. But, I remember Viasat, I was just about to give up. I was actually we're at the MBA class, and I applied like 3 weeks before. And I remember talking to my friend Adrian, the one that told me to, check out Viasat, that it was working there. And I was there a Friday at school. I'm like, man, I don't think I applied again. I still haven't heard anything. Man, I'm afraid I might have to give up. And, he goes, I know what you mean, but just keep going. Well, the HR rep called me that afternoon saying, we'd like to start the interview process. It's like, just when you're ready to say, that's it. They started the interview process. So I'm already working the interview process with the other company. I get through the hiring manager. That was my biggest fear. I'm not a satellite expert, but you do your homework, you learn the technology as best you can. And, so I went in and it's managing people and projects, that's what we do. And, I I got through, it seemed like it went well. And then they do a fit interview where it's, it's almost a full day. You're interviewing, it wasn't a panel, but it was 6 different people that interviewed me for 45 minutes at a time. And it's really to see, do they like you? Can you fit on the team? And I wasn't really as worried about that as I was the hiring manager, because I knew I got along with people well. And as I'd said, I went to that transition workshop and I felt like this was my tribe. These were my people. I knew I'd fit in. So I left my car, left my phone purposely in the car. When I came back at the end of the interviews, I had an offer from the other place, from Cymer. And so I was like, cool. And then I'm like, oh, I hope I hear something from Viasat. So I'm kind of trying to push off Cymer for a bit to get what the offer is from Viasat and, have a decision. They're both great companies and both the hiring managers were great people. And Viasat, I, had my eyes on though. And I just didn't know what the offer was. And so this is another thing. When I'm talking to Viasat and I don't know the numbers. They don't have the offer letter because whoever that has to sign is in the UK. I'm like, are we in the 21st century? Can't you just scan it?
Gotta fax it.
But she said to me, I explained to her, I used my wife as an excuse for both the other company, why I needed time to make the decision. And then with Viasat, I'm like, hey, I'm interested mostly in Viasat. I go, but I've got an offer on the table that's in my, salary range. And my wife's concerned there's not really going to be an offer here, so I use her, and I
turn the flame up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's not me. And that might sound terrible, but it was, and I was interested in Viasat and there was that question, but it was, way to where I could get the information. And she said, well, what if I told you verbally, what the offer is, would that help? And I said, absolutely. And so she did. And, I was concerned, like if Viasat's offer is lower, do I still take it? If it's not, if it's, but anyway, their offer was like almost $30,000 more. So win right there. Then I had to go tell the other company like, hey, sorry, I've got this a much larger offer. And they're like, the HR person's trying to get me, and then he talks to the hiring manager. He just calls me up, like, what's the offer? And what do I need to do to get you here? And I knew it was going to be outside of their range, but they'd made an adjustment. And I said, I explained, I said, look, I'm sorry. I've got to take this with this one. I would have loved working with you, et cetera. But he actually said, look, if things don't work out with Viasat, give me a call. Be a pleasure to work with you. And so that's the challenge, that you don't want to burn bridges because you never know what's going to happen. And so I ended up accepting the offer with Viasat. And I remember it was the guy who leads the Operation Connect course. It was Bill Lober. He said, this is the guy who got me into really helping people with career transition. He said, you did transition just like we want people to do. Like you took the lessons we said and you did it. You did the networking, you did the hard work, and do you mind coming back and sharing your story? And, when at their new classes. And I was like, absolutely, so they had this, career graduates would come in at lunch. And so that's where it kind of started. And then I started teaching at Onward Opportunity, Catherine Warren. She used, she was, we were fast friends from her time at Onward Opportunity. And she asked me to come speak to the new cohorts about corporate culture and just my, my transition story and being kind of ultimately being a career transition tips brief. And, I just found, paying it forward was really important to me. And you know what, I was able to help people. And that was, so it was, I guess I had a successful transition story, but it was not without peril and struggle, and that's why, helping people, and in their journey is very important to me, and so, and now let's see, that's led into other, now it's fun. About 4 years after being at Viasat, after COVID, all that stuff's done. We're finally doing our transition workshops again. Our new veteran ERG lead, Bridget Guerrero, she's awesome. Said, we need somebody to do a career transition tips brief. And I was like, I'll do it. And there was people way senior to me at Viasat and, Admiral that was, working there. None of them volunteered. And she goes, yeah, I heard you do this with, onward opportunity, et cetera. Sounds good. And so now, it was great because full circle, what turned me on to Viasat, now I'm the one providing the career transition tips brief to all the 50, military and military spouses coming in looking, for what's next. And so it's
one of the key things that you talked about for somebody planning for and preparing for and planning for, however you want to put it, their transition is first and most important is don't put all your eggs in one basket. You wanted to work at Viasat, but that wasn't the only place you applied. The other thing is having that honest evaluation with yourself and going, okay, this is where I'd like to be, but somebody's reviewed my skill set, my experience, and said, this is more where you're, apt to find employment. And so that's a big deal because I think a lot of people kind of set, it's one thing to aim for the best you can get, but sometimes you might set that goal a little too lofty based on what you have. And I'm going to be tentative how I say this, what you think you're entitled to get coming out of these careers.
Absolutely. And, especially you come out as someone at senior rank, you feel this entitlement. And that's something I train people against. And that's, and you're going to have to take a step back. And 66% of transitioning military actually taking a pay cut initially. And that's maybe a surprise to them because people always think that there's a big rumor that people don't make good money in the military. We do actually quite well, like if you're smart about it. But absolutely, there's a sense of I'm at this rank, I should make this much, and they should expect, they should know. Don't they know who I am? and so that's one of the things I try to help people guard against. I said, whenever I close on my transition tips brief, the first thing I say is, in closing is, thank you for your service. But remember, it was service. Nobody owes you anything. And don't have that sense of entitlement because it doesn't do you well. And it doesn't do any of us well in the entire veteran community. So, take that same approach that you had when you joined the military, when you raised your right hand, and swore allegiance to the Constitution. Take that same attitude as you're going into the private sector for what's next. And you're probably going to have to take a little step down. In San Diego, like you see what is with biotech, that's one where they've often not seen the translatable skills that we have as much. I think it's getting better, but it's not quite the same. A lot of people would have to start very, at the, nearly entry level. And hits people with, their pride, something serious, but it depends on, what you want, long term. And that's, I think you got to, keep that in mind is, what matters to you long term. And if you're going to have to start a little bit lower, well, you got to get in the door some way and then, go from there.
What's the name of your company that you started?
It's Measured Money Maneuvers. So it's a mouthful, I know.
What's the acronym? We're in the military.
MMM. So I actually started just when I started doing all the training, I recorded and posted the slide decks for free. So I created my own website back then. And since it was kind of more military, I initially started Military Money Maneuvers. And I wasn't making any money. It was just helping people, get smart with money and get smart with transition. So I just provided free resources and, something that, I enjoyed doing was, the financial aspect and also in career transition, which sadly not enough of the programs talk about the money side. But, yes. And I was looking to rebrand because military is going to be, is a key niche of mine, but I also understand, I've worked with a bunch of high tech engineers in San Diego. I understand equity compensation very well. So I'm like, okay, I need to get military out of the name. And I couldn't think of another good name like right off. So I was like, measured money maneuvers. That sounds very financial planning. That's what you want, is your money to be very measured, how the steps you take. So that was how it came out. And this is the brand logo we came up with. My wife, she's a good designer, helped.
An architect probably doesn't hurt, right?
Exactly. So
any last pieces of advice?
Last piece of advice. One, opportunity, it doesn't fall in your lap. It's what you take advantage of. You see it in the military, even like going for the Olmsted Scholar Program. That was, I wasn't going to get handed that, but you got to seek out opportunity. And it's, if you seek it out, you will find it. And we already talked, let's see, about networking. That's never ending. And networking it's not about, I know Brian Grana already talked much about this, which is very good, but, and Phil, Kendro, but networking isn't about getting somebody to help you out. It's about establishing relationships. And even when you're in transition, you can help. And often I found that to be the case. And that's what we do in the military, is we have this desire to serve. And so much of networking is just building relationships, and you might be able to help somebody out. Like one of the companies I was interested in was Dexcom, and they, somebody wasn't even a veteran, but connected with, was doing an informational interview with. Guess what? His son was getting near the end of high school and was considering the Navy. And, I was like, hey, I'm not going to sell him on this. I go, but military is a love-hate relationship with a lot. But if you'd like, I'd be happy to sit down with your son, and talk to him about, what he's thinking about. It's good and bad, ROTC, potential if he wants to go an officer, go in this way. I said, and that kind of, he was much, I guess, I don't think he expected that, because he knew I was, transitioning, searching for something. But that's what you do. You help each other out. And sure enough, 5 years later, I'm not there, but somebody else was interested in Dexcom. I'm like, hey, let me reach out to this person. Sure enough, same day your response says, yeah, connect me with him. And it was probably, I think back, I'm like, I bet the fact that I was willing to help his son made a difference there. So networking, it's relationship building, and it never ends. Pay it forward, because we have a sense of duty, and I think service becomes, if it's not already ingrained in us when we're young, serving in as a first responder in the military, it becomes part of who we are. And so it's important for us to pay it forward. And not only do you help people out, but it helps us out. Like, it feels good to really help people get on get to what's next, and to help them, with the transition. It's almost, I feel like, better for me than it is for them. Let's see, any other final, one last thing. The whole package matters. So, from resume to everything else, but don't forget thank you cards. A written thank you card is kind of a lost art, but that is a deal breaker, or not a deal breaker. That's a game changer many times. And so when you're doing informational interviews or actual interviews or what have you, just write the thank you letter. And we've learned a lot over the years about how gratitude helps. What I found is writing 3 things about, what I'm grateful for is not near as helpful to me as writing a real thank you to somebody for something I'm really thankful for. And that's really, but I can't tell you the number of times it's made a difference, not only for me, but for others. But when they do an informational interview, follow up with an email, and I would follow up with a hard copy letter. I say both because you don't know if that letter will make it through. And at least you got the email, but make it personalized, but do it. It'll make the difference. I know of several people where it made the difference on decision between 2 strong candidates. that was the tipping point. It was kind of the cherry on top that made a difference of why they got hired versus somebody else.
I appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you. Appreciate your time as well.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.